What does it feel like to rule the most peaceful world that has ever existed and still be unable to sleep? He had done what his father could not. He had been brave when his father was fearful. He had been decisive when his siblings could not move. He freed them. He took the throne. He gave the world a golden age. No wars, no hunger, no suffering. The earth gave freely. The seasons turned gently, and human beings lived long lives that ended without pain. And he was terrified, because somewhere inside the peace and the abundance and the perfect order he had built, 3 words were buried like a stone in the ground. By your own child. Tonight, while you sleep, we are going to answer it. Now, let's go back to the very first moment of a king's rule, and the fear that would shape everything that came after. Kronos freed his siblings. He went to the bonds that Outranas had placed on the Titans, the constraints that had kept them from fully exercising their power in the world, and he broke them, one by one. Oceanus, Hyperion, Ceus, Crius, Iapetus, Mnemosyne, Themis, Tethys, Thea, Phoebe, all of them released, all of them free. There was something in that moment that the mythology does not describe, but that is easy to imagine. The particular feeling of liberation after constraint, the expansion into space that had been denied. The Titans were not small beings who had been kept in small boxes. They were forces of nature who had been prevented from being fully what they were. And now they could be. The world felt it. Oceanus reached his full extent at the boundaries of everything. Hyperion moved through the sky with his full brightness. Themis settled into the deep structure of the world with the completeness of a law that had always been true, but had never been allowed to fully express itself. The world that had been constrained by Ouranus's fear began to breathe. But the Cyclopes stayed in Tartarus. The Centimanes stayed in Tartarus. Kronos looked at them as Ouranus had looked at them. He felt what Ouranus had felt, and he made the same choice Ouranus had made. He left them where they were, in the deep dark, sealed away, and he turned his back on them and walked into the world that was now his. Gaia felt this. She said nothing, but she noted it, and she would not forget it. Kronos stood at the summit of the divine world and looked at everything that existed. He was the most powerful being alive. He had done what no one else had dared. He had taken the sickle and hidden himself and waited and struck when the moment came. He had freed his siblings from the oppression of a fearful father. He had changed the world, and now the world was his to govern. He was intelligent. He was cunning. He had the capacity for clear analysis that had allowed him to see the situation correctly when his siblings could not. He had the decisiveness to act when everyone else had found reasons for inaction. These were not small qualities. These were the qualities of a leader, of someone who could see what needed to be done and do it regardless of the cost. And yet from the very first moment of his rule, the prophecy was in him. By your own child. He could not set it aside. He could not reason it away or argue himself out of believing it. Ouranus had spoken it as he retreated wounded across the sky, and the words had the quality of things that are true in a way that transcends the question of whether you want them to be. They were in him the way a stone is in the ground, not moving, not changing, simply present at the foundation of everything, bearing the weight of everything above. He was the ruler of the world, and he was afraid. Kronos turned to his sister Rhea. Of all his siblings, Rhea was the one he chose as his queen. She was the great mother Titan, the goddess of the flow of things, the divine presence in the movement of generations and the turning of time. There was something fitting in this pairing. Kronos, who would become so desperately concerned with preventing the future from arriving, had chosen as his companion the goddess whose essential nature was the flow of time itself, the force that could not be stopped, embodied in the being he loved and made his queen. Rhea was ancient and powerful. She moved through the world with the quality of the earth in its dynamic aspect, not the static permanence of Gaia, but the ground in motion. The earth as it changes and flows and carries life from one form to another. She was maternal in the deepest sense, not simply the mother of her own children, though she would prove to be that in ways that would cost her everything and eventually change the world, but the embodiment of motherhood as a universal principle, the force of generation, the capacity of the world to keep producing new life, new forms, new beings who carried within them the potential for everything that would come next. She was warm where Kronos was calculating. She felt things fully where he analyzed them. She was present to the world in a way that he, increasingly consumed by the prophecy and its implications, would prove less and less capable of being. They came together, the ruler of the world and his queen, Kronos and Rhea, the youngest Titan and his sister, choosing each other in the way that the Titans chose their companions, through the recognition of something in each other that matched and completed what each of them was. And the world settled into the age of their rule. What followed was what the ancient Greeks called the Golden Age. And it is important to say clearly, before anything else, that it was real. It was not simply a story that later ages told to comfort themselves. It was not a myth in the dismissive sense, not a pretty lie invented to make people feel better about the present by imagining a better past. Within the world of the mythology, the Golden Age was real. It happened. The world was genuinely different. Now, close your eyes. Take a breath. Picture the world as it was then. Fields of golden grain swaying without any hand to tend them. Rivers running cold and clear through valleys that had never known the sound of a sword. And above it all, a sky so still and so generous that winter came and went like a long, soft exhale. The fruit hung heavy from branches because it wanted to be eaten. The air carried something in it that later ages would spend thousands of years trying to remember. And everywhere, quietly, unhurried, life simply was. The earth provided for human beings without being asked, without cultivation, without the labor of plowing and planting and tending and harvesting that would come to define most of human existence in every subsequent age. The soil produced grain on its own. The trees bore fruit without being tended. Rivers ran with honey in some accounts, with milk in others. The seasons were mild. Winter existed but did not bite. Summer was warm but not brutal. The world was in a state of natural generosity that it would not be in again. No one worked, not because people were lazy, but because work was not necessary. The gap between what people needed and what the world provided without being asked was zero. The earth gave what was needed. This was the condition of existence in the Golden Age, and it was as real as anything else in the mythology. There was no war. This deserves to be said slowly. No war. No armies. No walls built around cities to keep out invaders. No weapons made for the purpose of killing other people. No strategies for taking what belonged to others by force. No young men sent to die for the interests of those with power. None of it. The Golden Age was the only age in Greek mythology in which human beings did not kill each other at scale. Why was there no war? Not because people had been improved, not because human nature had been altered, but because the conditions that generate war did not exist. War, in the Greek understanding, came from scarcity and desire, from the gap between what people had and what they wanted, from competition for resources that were not sufficient for everyone, from the accumulation of power by some at the expense of others, and the resentment that accumulation generated, and the violence that resentment eventually became. In the Golden Age, there was no scarcity. The earth gave freely. There was no competition for resources because resources were abundant. There was nothing to fight over because the world provided what was needed. The conditions for war did not exist, and so war did not exist. There was no sickness, no old age, in some accounts. Life was long and the end of it came gently, like the descent into sleep, without the long diminishment and suffering that mortal life in later ages would come to know. People were born and they lived, and when their time came they simply stopped living, without drama, without pain, without the long decline that made death a horror rather than a transition. Justice existed without laws. The Greeks described this with a word that meant something like spontaneous righteousness. People behaved well not because laws compelled them and courts enforced the laws and punishments deterred wrongdoing. They behaved well because the conditions of the world had not yet generated the pressures that made wrongdoing attractive. When the earth gives freely, stealing is pointless. When no one has accumulated more than others, envy has nothing to fix on. When life is good and long and without suffering, the desperation that drives people to harm each other does not exist. This was the Golden Age. This was the world that Kronos ruled. And Kronos, ruling over all of it, could not rest. The abundance was real. The peace was real. The world humming along in its golden harmony. Humans and titans coexisting without conflict. The earth providing. The seasons turning with a gentleness that later ages would not know. All of it real. All of it present around him. And the prophecy was in him. Also real. Also present. By your own child. He was the most powerful being alive. He had the loyalty of his Titan siblings. He had Rhea beside him. He had a world that was working as a world was supposed to work, peaceful and abundant and governed with intelligence. He had everything that a ruler could have. And he could not stop thinking about those three words. The fear did not announce itself dramatically. It did not arrive as a crisis or a breakdown. It was more like the slow action of water on stone. The constant, patient, invisible work of anxiety at the foundations of everything. Present in every moment. Not always conscious. Not always the thing he was thinking about. But always there, beneath everything else. The stone beneath the ground. The current beneath the surface of the water. Always moving. Always wearing away at whatever it touched. Rhea would be with child. This was inevitable. They were together. They were divine beings at the height of their powers. Children were the natural product of their union. Children were what the world produced when beings as vital and as powerful as they were came together. And every child would be the prophecy made flesh. Every child would be the possibility of his overthrow, given a face and a body and the power that came from being born of Kronos and Rhea. He turned this over in his mind. He turned it over every day. He examined it from every angle that his considerable intelligence could provide. He looked for the loophole, the interpretation that made the prophecy less absolute, the reading that offered some way out. He found none. The words were what they were. And Rhea was with child. To understand what was about to happen, it is necessary to understand what marriage meant in the ancient Greek world. Not simply as a personal relationship, though it was that. As an institution, as a structure. Marriage was the foundational unit of Greek society. It was the arrangement through which property was transferred between families, through which alliances were formed and maintained, through which children were given legitimate status and the legal protections that came with it. It was the structure that organized the transmission of everything from one generation to the next. Without marriage, without its establishment of legitimate lineage and legitimate inheritance, the social order that the Greeks valued would dissolve into chaos. Hera, who would later be one of Rhea's children, would become the goddess of marriage, the divine guardian of the institution, and her role would be exactly this: to maintain the sacred bond, to insist that the commitment made in marriage was kept, to be the divine presence that said the promise mattered and the breaking of it had consequences. But that was in the future. In the time of the Golden Age, in the world of the Titans, marriage was already the structure that organized divine life. Kronos and Rhea were married. They had come together in the way that the Titans came together, in the recognition of what they were to each other, in the union of the ruler of the world and his queen. And that union was producing children. The first was coming, and Kronos, holding the prophecy in him like a stone in the ground, was deciding what to do about it. The Golden Age was at its height. The world was as good as it would ever be. And in the heart of the being who governed it, something dark was growing. Something that would, in time, swallow the very children it feared. Something that would transform the world's ruler into the world's most intimate tyrant. The fear was making its plan, and Rhea did not yet know what was coming. While Kronos ruled the world above and the Golden Age spread its abundance across the earth, another lineage was quietly filling the world with its own children. Nyx, the night, the ancient goddess who had been present since the second generation of existence, who had come from chaos alongside Gaia and Tartarus and Eros and Erebus, who was so old and so powerful that even Zeus would one day hesitate at the edge of her domain. Nyx had been productive. Alone, without a partner in many cases, she had produced children who would govern the most fundamental and unavoidable experiences of mortal life. Not the dramatic experiences, not the adventures and the wars and the loves that would fill the mythology with its famous stories. The quiet experiences, the ones that arrived without announcement and could not be refused. Death, sleep, fate, strife, retribution, the ones that waited for every mortal life at various points along its path, patient and certain and completely indifferent to the wishes of the person they came for. These were the children of Nyx, born from the night, governing the dark spaces of existence that no other deity claimed because no other deity wanted to be what they were. Thanatos was death, not the violence that caused death, not the weapon or the illness or the accident, not the physical mechanism by which a living body stopped being alive. Those things were governed by other forces. Thanatos was the transition itself, the moment between being alive and not being alive, the crossing. The Greeks made a careful distinction that later cultures have not always maintained. They distinguished between violent death, the death that came suddenly and forcibly and before its proper time, and natural death, the death that arrived when a life had run its course. Violent death was associated with Ares and with the Keres, the dark spirits of violent death who haunted battlefields. Natural death was Thanatos. Thanatos was gentle. This is the thing that surprises people when they first encounter him. The god of death in Greek mythology was described consistently as gentle, as soft in his approach, as someone whose arrival was more like a release than an attack. He came quietly. He touched the eyes of the dying, and the eyelids closed. He lifted the soul from the body with care. He did not tear or rip or violate. He simply received what had run its course and carried it to where it needed to go. The Greeks depicted him as a beautiful young man with wings, often sleeping or carrying an extinguished torch. The torch had burned. Now it was done. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, simply done. The flame had consumed what it was given, and now the fuel was gone, and the darkness that was always waiting had returned. There is a wisdom in this depiction that becomes more apparent the longer you think about it. The fear of death that dominates so much of human experience is largely the fear of violence, of suffering, of the pain of dying rather than of death itself. What Thanatos represented was the other thing, the simple fact that the living state ends, that the flame eventually goes out, not as a tragedy, not as a defeat, but as the natural conclusion of a process that had its own integrity and its own completeness. He was the twin of Hypnos. They were born together from Nyx, and they were inseparable in the mythology, the two brothers who looked almost identical. Sleep and death, the nightly rehearsal and the final performance, the temporary release and the permanent one. They lived together in the underworld, in the cave where Hypnos spread his poppies and the river of forgetting flowed past. Two brothers, two darknesses, one borrowed and one permanent. Hypnos was sleep. Every night, Hypnos moved through the world. He came quietly, without announcement, through every window and every door and every gap in every wall. He came to the king in his palace and the farmer in his hut and the sailor on his ship and the child in its cradle. He came to the powerful and the powerless without distinction. He came to those who wanted him and those who tried to resist him. He came to everyone. He carried poppies, the red flower that the ancient Greeks had observed, with the precision that comes from close attention to the natural world, produced a heaviness in the eyelids and a softening of the body's resistance to rest. The chemistry of the poppy, which modern pharmacology has since analyzed in meticulous detail, was known to the ancient world through observation and experience. People ate or drank preparations made from the poppy and became drowsy, became insensible, moved towards sleep with a speed and a completeness that ordinary exhaustion alone did not produce. Hypnos carried poppies because poppies were his symbol. They were the sign that he was near, the heaviness of the eyelids in the evening, the way the body begins to pull downward as the night deepens, the gradual surrender of the conscious mind to the older, deeper processes that operate during sleep. All of it was Hypnos, moving through the world with his poppies and his wings and his ancient purpose. Sleep was not trivial in the ancient world. It was not simply the maintenance interval between productive periods of waking life. It was a different state of existence, a state in which the conscious mind stepped back and something older and less governed took over. Dreams came in sleep, and dreams, in the ancient Greek understanding, were meaningful. They carried messages from the divine world. They processed the experiences of the day in ways that the waking mind could not. They showed things that were hidden from ordinary waking consciousness. The gates of sleep, in the mythology, were two, one made of ivory and one of horn. Dreams that came through the ivory gate were false, beautiful but deceptive. Dreams that came through the horn gate were true, glimpses of things as they actually were or would be. The distinction mattered. Not all dreams were prophecy, but some were. And the art of interpretation, the ability to know which gate a dream had come through and what it meant if it had come through the horn gate, was a valued skill throughout the ancient world. Hypnos was the god who presided over all of this, over the nightly departure from waking life and the nightly return, over the strange territory between the worlds that sleep opened up, over the democratic equality of the darkness, in which every living creature, powerful or weak, beloved or despised, surrendered to the same process and lay equally helpless in the grip of the same ancient god. He was also capable of remarkable interventions in the affairs of the gods. In the Iliad, Hera bribed Hypnos to put Zeus to sleep so that she could intervene in the Trojan War without Zeus noticing. It took considerable persuasion and a significant gift, because Hypnos remembered the last time Hera had asked him to put Zeus to sleep, and remembered the rage of Zeus when he woke and understood what had happened. Hypnos was afraid of Zeus in a way he was not afraid of any other god. But with the right inducement, with the promise of one of the Graces as his wife, he agreed. And Zeus slept, and the war was changed. Even the king of gods was subject to Hypnos. Everyone was subject to Hypnos. That was the point. That was what made him one of the most powerful beings in the mythology, despite his gentleness and his quiet approach and his lack of dramatic stories. He came for everyone, without exception, every night. Nemesis was divine retribution, not punishment in the human legal sense, not the penalty that courts imposed, and that could be appealed and commuted and avoided by those with sufficient resources and cleverness. Nemesis was something more automatic than that, more inevitable. The correction that the universe imposed on itself when things had gone too far in one direction. Her name came from the Greek word for distribution, for the allocation of what was due. Nemesis ensured that what was due arrived, not as a moral judgment, not because she was angry or had been offended, but because the universe had a structure that did not tolerate indefinite imbalance. When things had moved too far from what they should be, Nemesis came to move them back. She was particularly concerned with hubris. The Greek word hubris has entered English with some of its original meaning intact, but not all of it. We use hubris to mean excessive pride, overconfidence, the arrogance that precedes a fall. The Greeks meant something more specific. Hubris was not simply being proud. It was the violation of the proper order of things. The assumption that you were exempt from the limits that applied to everyone else. The behavior of someone who had forgotten, or who had decided they did not care, that there were things larger than themselves and rules that applied regardless of their power or their desire. Hubris attracted Nemesis the way a wound attracts infection. Not because Nemesis was looking for it, not because she was hovering malevolently over the affairs of gods and mortals, but because hubris created the imbalance that Nemesis existed to correct. She was not the punishment for hubris. She was the correction that hubris made necessary. The distinction matters. Punishment is imposed from outside by a judge who has decided that a wrong was done and a penalty should follow. Nemesis was more like the rebound of something pressed too far. The spring that has been compressed beyond its limit finally releasing. Not a judgment about the past, but an adjustment in the present. The universe finding its equilibrium again. She was depicted sometimes with a wheel, the wheel of fortune that turned and brought high things down and raised low things up. Sometimes with scales, the instrument of measurement and balance. Sometimes with a sword, though this was the less common depiction. What she was depended on which aspect of her function was being emphasized. The turning wheel emphasized inevitability and cycle. The scales emphasized balance and measure. All of them were accurate to different facets of what she was. The Moirai were the Fates, three sisters whose names described the three acts of their work. Clotho, the spinner. She spun the thread of each life at the moment of birth, drawing it from her distaff and setting it in motion. The thread was the life. Its quality, its thickness and texture, the material it was made of, all of this was determined at the moment of spinning and could not be changed afterward. Some threads were strong and some were delicate. Some were made of fine materials and some of coarse. The spinning was the beginning, and what was spun at the beginning was what the life was made of. Lachesis, the allotter, she measured the thread. She determined how long each life would be, how much of the thread would be spun out before it ended. The measure was set, and it did not respond to prayer or to bargaining or to the passionate desire of gods and mortals who loved the person whose thread was being measured and wanted more of it. Lachesis measured, and the measure was what it was. Atropos, the inflexible, the one who could not be turned. She cut the thread. When the measure that Lachesis had set was reached, when the thread had been spun out to its determined length, Atropos brought her shears and cut it. And the life ended, not because of anything the person had done or not done, not because of merit or demerit, because the thread had run out, because the measure had been reached, because Atropos was inflexible and her shears were always sharp. The Moirai were older than the Olympians. They were older than most things. They were the daughters of Nyx, born from the night itself, and they operated according to principles that even Zeus could not override. This was one of the most uncomfortable truths in the mythology for the Greeks to sit with, that the king of gods, the most powerful being in existence, was subject to the fates, that even he could not change what the three sisters had determined, that there were things beyond divine power. There were stories of gods and heroes who tried to cheat the fates. Sisyphus managed to temporarily chain Thanatos so that death could not come for anyone, and the world became very strange in the time when no one could die. Apollo once got the Moirai drunk and extracted a promise that his friend Admetus could live past his appointed time if someone else agreed to die in his place. These interventions were possible, barely, in extreme circumstances, but they were not reversals. They were loopholes found in specific cases, not the overturning of the system. The system held. The thread was always spun and measured and cut. Atropos was always inflexible in the end. Eris was strife, not conflict in the heroic sense, not the clean opposition of armies on a battlefield. Eris was the strife that operated at the level of daily life, the discord between people who should have been able to get along, the quarrel that escalated beyond any rational proportion to its original cause, the argument that could not be resolved because both sides had stopped caring about the subject of the argument and were only caring about winning. She was the one who threw the golden apple at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, inscribed for the fairest, thrown among the goddesses at a divine celebration from which she had been excluded because no one wanted Eris at their wedding, because Eris at a wedding was the beginning of trouble. But excluding her only ensured that when she came with maximum effect. The apple fell among the divine guests, and three goddesses reached for it, and the contest that followed led directly to the Trojan War. This is Eris's character. She does not create strife by direct assault. She creates it by introducing the element that people were not prepared for, the thing that triggers the worst in everyone involved. The apple was not a weapon. It was a question. Who was the fairest? An innocent question in the wrong company, at the wrong moment, with the wrong stakes attached to the answer. Eris introduced it and stepped back and watched what everyone else did with it. She had many children of her own. Hesiod gives us the list. Toil and forgetfulness and hunger and pain. Battles and conflicts and murders and manslaughters. Quarrels and lies and disputes. Lawlessness and ruin. And then, almost as an afterthought, one more child. Oath. Because every strife requires an oath sworn in anger, a commitment made in the heat of conflict that outlasts the conflict and creates its own chain of consequences. The Hesperides were the daughters of the evening, or of night herself depending on the source, or of Atlas and Hesperus in other accounts. Like so much in the mythology, their precise parentage is not uniform across all the ancient sources. What is consistent is what they were and where they lived and what they tended. They lived in a garden at the western edge of the world, at the place where the sun went down, where the day ended and the night began, at the boundary between the known world and the darkness beyond Oceanus. Their garden contained a tree that bore golden apples. The apple tree was a gift from Gaia to Hera on the occasion of her marriage to Zeus. It had been planted at the edge of the world where the Hesperides could tend it and guard its fruit. The apples were divine. They were immortality conferring, or they were objects of beauty and desire, or they were simply golden and therefore precious in a world where gold carried its quality of divine shining through the inheritance of Thea. Depending on the story that needed them, the golden apples were one or all of these things. The Hesperides themselves were gentle beings. Their names varied in different accounts, but generally meant things like evening light, and the glow of the western sky at sunset, and the colors that the sky turned in the hours before full dark. They were the daughters of the twilight, the last light of the day, given form and voice in the peaceful task of tending a garden at the end of the world. They sang as they tended their garden. The mythology mentions this with the simple certainty of a detail that needed no elaboration. The Hesperides sang, "At the edge of the world, where the day ended, in the garden with the golden tree, 3 or 4 or 7 sisters sang as they went about their work." Their song was part of what made the western edge of the world what it was, the last sound before the silence of full night. A serpent guarded the tree with them, Laden, the serpent who never slept, who wound himself around the base of the golden apple tree and kept continuous watch. The Hesperides and the serpent together made a guardian that was not easily circumvented, which is why, when Heracles came for the golden apples as one of his 12 labors, the task required the full extent of his ingenuity and his strength to accomplish. But that too is a story for another time. For now, the Hesperides sang at the edge of the world. The night's children were spread across existence, governing its darkest and most unavoidable territories. And the golden age continued in the world above, beautiful and abundant, and already carrying within it the seed of its own ending. The golden age was not simply an age of human happiness. It was the age of the Titans in their full expression. With Uranus retreated and Kronos ruling, the 12 great Titans who had been constrained under their father's fear were now free to become fully what they were, to spread across the world, to fill every domain, to govern every fundamental force and phenomenon that the world contained. And they did, not with the drama of conquest or the noise of war, with the quiet certainty of things taking their proper place. The way water finds its level, the way a plant grows toward the light, it was always going to grow toward. Each Titan moved into the domain that was essentially theirs, and the world organized itself around them. Oceanus extended himself to his full reach, the great encircling river, the boundary of everything. He spread to touch every shore, to flow around the entire disk of the world, to be present at every point where the land ended and the unknown began. He flowed east and west and north and south simultaneously, because a river that encircled everything was present in all directions at once from any point within the circle. And as he flowed, the rivers of the interior world came into their own. Oceanus and Tethys had produced 3,000 sons, 3,000 river gods. And in the Golden Age, each of these divine beings settled into his river and began to be what he was. The Nile in Egypt, old and slow, and bearing its annual gift of silt to the fields along its banks. The Euphrates and the Tigris in Mesopotamia, the twin rivers between which the oldest human cities had grown. The Styx in the underworld, whose waters were so sacred that even the gods swore their most binding oaths by them. The Alpheus in Greece, who would fall in love with the nymph Arethusa and follow her through an underground passage beneath the sea to emerge in Sicily. The Helios, the greatest river in Greece, who would wrestle Heracles for the hand of Deianira, each one a divine being, each one a son of Oceanus and Tethys with his own character and his own story. The rivers were the life of the ancient world in a way that is difficult to fully appreciate from a modern perspective. Before roads, rivers were the highways of civilization. Goods traveled by river. People traveled by river. Cities grew at river crossings and river mouths, because those were the places where the movement of goods and people was most concentrated and most accessible. Agriculture depended on rivers for irrigation in the dry seasons and for the annual floods that deposited the nutrient-rich silt that made farming possible in the first place. Every river was sacred. Every river had its god, its particular divine presence that inhabited those specific waters and governed their behavior. When the river flooded, the river god was expressing something. When the river ran low in drought, the river god needed to be propitiated. When the river turned a mill or carried a boat or supplied the water that kept a city alive, the river god was giving a gift. The relationship between a community and its river was a divine relationship, mediated by the god whose body the river was. Oceanus held all of this together. 3,000 rivers, all of them his sons, all of them connected to the great encircling flow that was his own body. The rivers of the world were his circulation. The water that fell as rain and gathered in streams and flowed to the sea and evaporated and fell again was his movement. He was not separate from the rivers. He was the ocean from which they ultimately came and to which they ultimately returned. The complete cycle, the father and the destination of every flowing water in the world. Tethys was present in every spring and every underground stream. The fresh water that emerged from the earth at sacred sites throughout the ancient world. The water that was always cold and always clear no matter what the season. The water that people traveled to drink because they believed it had healing properties or prophetic powers. This was her gift. The goddess of fresh water, present in every place where water emerged from the earth to offer itself to living things. Together, Oceanus and Tethys governed the complete water world of the ancient understanding. Not separate from each other, but continuous, their domains flowing into each other the way salt water and fresh water flow together at the mouths of rivers, the way rain falls from the evaporation of the sea to become the rivers that flow back to the sea. A cycle with no beginning and no end. An ongoing exchange between the boundary of everything and the interior of everything, between the encircling river and the springs of the interior world. Hyperion took his place in the sky. He had always been associated with the paths of the celestial bodies, with the light that moved through the heavens in its ordered courses. In the Golden Age, with his full freedom restored, he moved through the sky with a completeness that his father's restriction had prevented. Before Helios had his specific story and his specific chariot and his specific daily journey, Hyperion was the divine presence behind all celestial light. He was the original brightness, the primal radiance from which all the more specific forms of divine light would eventually be differentiated. The way white light contains all colors before a prism separates them, Hyperion's light contained within it the sun and the moon and the dawn before these were given to his children as their particular domains. He moved from east to west with the sun. He preceded the rising of the stars. He was present in the brightness of the daytime sky, not just in the solar disk, but in the blue expanse of it, in the quality of the light that filled the air, even in the spaces between the direct line from the sun to the eye. That diffuse, pervasive brightness of a clear daytime sky. That was Hyperion, the one who traveled above, filling the sky with his presence. His wife Thea was with him, the goddess of shining and of sight. She gave to the sun its particular quality of gold. She gave to the moon its particular quality of silver. She gave to the stars their particular quality of cold white fire in the dark. The things that shone in the sky shone with her quality. Without Thea, the celestial bodies would have had their light, but not their specific character, not the quality of that light that distinguished one from another, that made gold different from silver and silver different from the white of stars. Together, Hyperion and Thea governed the complete light world of the ancient sky, the source of the light and the quality of its shining, the movement of brightness through the heavens and the ability of eyes to receive that brightness and make meaning from it. From Hyperion and Thea came Helios, the sun, not the abstract celestial light that Hyperion embodied, but the specific, daily, visible, warming presence of the solar disk crossing the sky from east to west. Helios drove a chariot, for horses pulled it, white and gold and fire-tempered, the horses of the sun that no mortal could control. Each morning Helios rose from the palace of the sun in the east, where Eos had opened the gates of the sky for him. He took up his reins. He drove across the sky, and each evening he descended into the west, into the stream of Oceanus, where a golden cup was waiting to carry him around the world beneath the earth and back to the east in time for the next morning. He saw everything. This was his particular quality and his particular burden. The sun illuminated the entire world. Nothing on the surface of the earth was hidden from the sun's light. Nothing happened in daylight that Helios did not see. He was the great witness, the eye that looked down on all of it, on the affairs of gods and mortals alike, without the power to intervene and without the ability to look away. When Hephaestus wanted to know who had slept with his wife Aphrodite, it was Helios who told him, because Helios had seen. When Demeter searched the earth for her daughter Persephone, it was Helios who told her what he had witnessed, because Helios had seen. He was the divine surveillance of the daylit world, all-seeing, uninvolved, always present, always watching. This made him both valuable and burdensome as a presence in the mythology. Valuable because the truth was available through him. Burdensome because nothing could be hidden from him. Every act committed in daylight was known to Helios. Every betrayal, every kindness, every moment of heroism, and every moment of cowardice that happened under the open sky was filed in the memory of the sun god who had witnessed it from above. He had children, many children, including Phaeton, whose story is one of the most famous cautionary tales in the mythology. Phaeton was the son of Helios by the mortal woman Clymene, and he grew up knowing who his father was but unable to prove it to those who doubted him. He went to his father and asked for proof of their relationship. Helios, moved by his son's need, swore by the Styx that he would grant any request. And Phaeton asked to drive the solar chariot for one day. Helios begged him to choose anything else. He explained that the horses of the sun were ungovernable by any hand but his own, that the path was treacherous through regions of sky where the constellations of terrible beasts could startle even divine horses, that too high and the earth would freeze, too low and it would burn, and the path between them required constant correction and unrelenting skill. Phaeton took the reins anyway. The horses felt a lighter hand than Helios's and bolted. The chariot veered. Too close to the earth and forests caught fire. Rivers dried. Libya became a desert. Africa was scorched. The earth cried out to Zeus, and Zeus threw his lightning bolt at the chariot, and Phaeton fell burning into the river Eridanus. His sisters, the Heliades, wept so long at the river's edge that they were transformed into poplar trees, and their tears became amber. This story, told in the time of the Golden Age and after, was a story about limits, about the gap between what you are and what you wish you were, about the danger of demanding a gift that exceeds your capacity to use it. Phaeton was not evil. He simply wanted something he could not handle, and the world nearly burned for it. From Hyperion and Thea came Selene, the moon, where Helios was constant and bright and relentless in his daily crossing. Selene was variable. The moon did not follow a simple daily rhythm. It followed a monthly rhythm, waxing from darkness to full brightness and waning back to darkness across the span of roughly 30 days. It rose at different times each night. It was full and brilliant on some nights and absent entirely on others. It changed its shape in a way that the sun never did. This variability made Selene different in character from her brother. Helios was reliable. You could set your agricultural calendar by him. He rose in the east and set in the west every day without variation. Selene was not reliable in the same way. She was there, and then she was not there. She was full, and then she was crescent, and then she was new and invisible. She followed her own rhythm, and you had to learn that rhythm to make use of her. She drove her own chariot, pulled by 2 white horses. She wore a crown that was the crescent moon, or sometimes she carried a torch. She moved across the night sky with the grace and the varying brightness of her nature, sometimes illuminating the night almost as fully as a clouded day, sometimes leaving the world in complete darkness broken only by stars. She was associated with the rhythms that the moon governed. The tides, which followed the moon's pull across the ocean. The menstrual cycle of women, which the Greeks observed to approximate the lunar month. The behavior of animals in the night, which was affected by the quality of the moonlight available. The ability of travelers to move at night, which depended entirely on whether the moon was providing light or not. Selene fell in love with a mortal, the shepherd Endymion, who was beautiful beyond any ordinary mortal and who was favored by Zeus with an extraordinary gift. Zeus offered Endymion any wish he wanted, and Endymion chose eternal sleep. Eternal youth preserved in endless sleep, somewhere on the slopes of Mount Latmos. And Selene came to him every night. She looked at him sleeping in his endless dream, and she loved him completely. This beautiful sleeping mortal who could not love her back because he was always asleep. There are different interpretations of what this story means. One reading sees in it the pathos of a love that cannot be reciprocated. Another sees in it something about the moon's relationship to the sleeping world, the way the moon looks down at the earth in the dark hours when everything on the surface is asleep and vulnerable and beautiful in its unconsciousness. The moon sees the sleeping world every night. And perhaps there is something in that specific act of seeing the beautiful and sleeping that was worth encoding in this story. And from Hyperion and Thea came Eos, the dawn, the rosy-fingered goddess who preceded her brother Helios every morning, who opened the gates of the sky for his chariot, who painted the eastern horizon with the colors that announced his coming before he arrived. Homer called her rosy-fingered. He also called her saffron-robed. The colors of Eos were the colors of the sky in the minutes before sunrise. The deep rose at the horizon, the saffron yellow just above it, the pale blue above that, gradually deepening to the full blue of the daytime sky. These transitions, these colors that the sky moved through in the minutes around dawn, were Eos in her physical form. She was the dawn not as a metaphor, but as a presence. The colors were her garments. The gradual brightening was her movement across the sky. She had a weakness, a vulnerability that the mythology recorded and that generated several of her stories. She fell in love with mortal men, not once, but repeatedly. Tithonus of Troy, whom she asked Zeus to make immortal and forgot to ask to make eternally young, so that he grew older and more diminished while Eos remained unchanged, until eventually he was so old and so small that he was transformed into a cicada whose buzzing could be heard at dawn. Orion the great hunter, Clytus, several others. The dawn's desire for mortal men was perhaps a way of expressing something about the nature of dawn itself. The dawn is brief. It is the most beautiful moment of the day and the most fleeting. It is always moving toward its own ending, always becoming the full daylight that is its own successor and its own erasure. The dawn desires the mortal because the mortal, like the dawn, is temporary, beautiful and brief, present and then gone. The dawn loves what resembles itself. The children of Hyperion and Thea governed every hour of the sky. Helios the day, Selene the night, Eos the threshold between them. The complete arc of light, from the first hint of brightness in the east through the full blaze of noon to the last silver light of the moon in the deep hours of night, was covered by these three children of the original light. The whole visible sky, in all its forms and all its hours, was their domain. And below them, in the world they illuminated, the golden age continued, abundant and peaceful, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful before they know they are ending. Before there were clocks, there was the sky. Before calendars were written and measurements were standardized and the hours of the day were divided into precise equal intervals, the sky was the only clock that existed. And the sky worked. It worked with a reliability that no human instrument has ever fully matched. It rose and fell and turned and returned with a precision that entire civilizations built themselves around, that farmers depended on to know when to plant and when to harvest, that sailors used to know where they were on an ocean with no landmarks, that priests used to know when to hold their rituals and when to expect the favor of the gods. The ancient Greeks did not experience the movement of the sun and moon and dawn as astronomical phenomena. They experienced it as the work of three divine beings who had specific responsibilities and specific methods, and who showed up day after day, night after night, with the faithfulness of beings who understood that the world depended on them. Those three beings were Helios, Selene, and Eos. To understand what Helios and Selene and Eos actually did, you need to understand how the ancient Greeks conceived of the sky structure. The sky was not simply open space above the earth. It had architecture. It had geography. It had specific regions and specific paths and specific features that the divine beings who inhabited it navigated through with as much precision as a sailor navigating a known coastline. At the eastern edge of the world, at the point where Oceanus met the land, there was a palace, the Palace of the Sun. It stood on the banks of the encircling river, at the place where the world began from the perspective of the sun's daily journey. This was where Helios slept when he was not crossing the sky. This was where his horses were stabled between their journeys. This was the departure point for every single day that the world had ever known. At the western edge of the world, at the point where the sun descended below the horizon and continued beneath the earth, there was Oceanus again. The encircling river that touched every shore was also the point of entry into the beneath-world journey that the sun made every night. After Helios descended from the western sky, a golden cup, a vessel large enough to carry the sun god and his horses, was waiting in the stream of Oceanus. He and his horses would step into this cup, and Oceanus would carry them around the southern edge of the world, beneath everything, through the darkness beneath the earth, back to the eastern palace in time for the next morning. Every morning, without exception, without fail, for as long as the world had existed and for as long as it would continue to exist. The cup traveled around, and Helios arrived at his eastern palace, and the horses were fed and the chariot was prepared, and Eos opened the gates and Helios took the reins, and the day began again. This structure, this precise mechanical understanding of how the sun's journey worked, was not simply poetic imagination. It was the ancient world's best attempt to describe a real phenomenon, the daily movement of the sun across the sky, in terms that made logical sense within the framework of their understanding of the world's geography. If the world was a flat disk surrounded by Oceanus, then the sun had to get from west back to east somehow. The golden cup carried by the encircling river was their answer. It was internally consistent. It explained the observation. It made the sun's daily return comprehensible. Every morning began not with Helios, but with Eos. Dawn preceded the sun. Before the solar disk appeared above the eastern horizon, before the direct light of the sun touched the world, the sky in the east began to change. Colors appeared in a sequence that anyone who has watched a sunrise knows by heart, even if they have never been told its name. The deep dark of the night sky at the horizon softened first to a dark blue, then a lighter blue, then a pink, then a rose, then a gold, then a brightness so intense it was almost painful to look at directly, and then, finally, the edge of the solar disk itself. All of this before Helios arrived. This was Eos. This was the dawn goddess doing her work, opening the gates of the sky, as the mythology described it, preparing the way, announcing the coming of her brother with the colors that were her signature. The Greeks called these colors saffron-colored and rosy-fingered, two of the most famous epithets in all of Homer. Saffron for the yellow gold of the sky just before sunrise, rosy for the pink that preceded even that. These were not random decorative descriptions. They were accurate observations of the specific colors that the sky moved through in the minutes around dawn, encoded in poetic language that had been refined over generations of people watching the same sky and finding the words to describe what they saw. Eos rose from her bed in the east. She harnessed her two horses, Lampus and Phaeton, whose names meant shining and blazing. She drove her chariot into the sky, and as she moved, the colors followed her across the horizon. The sky brightened from east to west as Eos progressed. so that by the time she had crossed the sky and the gates were fully open, the entire eastern horizon was ablaze and Helios was ready to begin his crossing. This daily act of preparation was not optional. Helios could not begin without it. The gates of the sky had to be opened. The darkness that held the world between sunsets had to be dissolved. The specific quality of morning light, different from the light of any other time of day, had to be established before the full light of the sun could arrive. Eos did all of this every morning, before anyone else in the world was awake, before even the earliest risers had opened their eyes. Eos was already at work. The daily rhythm of light in the ancient world depended on this sequence. Dawn came first, then sunrise, then the crossing of the sky, then sunset, then the moon, then darkness, then dawn again. Each element had its divine being. Each transition was governed. The world moved from darkness to light and back to darkness in a sequence that was not random but structured, each stage prepared for by the stage before it. Helios took the reins from Eos. The chariot of the sun was not simply a conveyance. It was the most powerful vehicle in existence. For horses pulled it, and the horses of the sun were not ordinary divine horses. They were fireborn. They were the horses that generated the heat and light of the solar day by their movement through the sky. Their breath was flame. Their hooves struck the air with the impact of light itself. They were fast with a speed that nothing else in creation could match, because the sun had to cross the entire sky from east to west in the hours between dawn and dusk, and the sky was large. Helios governed them with reins, but the governance required constant attention and constant correction. The path from east to west was not straight. It curved with the dome of the sky, rising first and then descending. In the early morning, the angle was shallow, and the horses were fresh, and the challenge was different from the midday challenge, when the horses were at their most powerful and the path was at its highest point and the heat below was most intense. And in the afternoon, as the path descended toward the western horizon, the horses were tired and the descent was steep and the angle required its own management. This daily navigation was what distinguished Helios from a passive participant in the sky's movement. He was not simply carried. He drove. He managed 4 fireborn horses across a curved path through the sky, maintaining the precise altitude that kept the earth neither frozen nor burned, ensuring that the light fell across the earth at the correct angle for the season, that the shadows moved at their proper pace, that the hours of daylight were what they were supposed to be for the time of year. The consequences of failure were visible in the story of Phaeton. When the horses felt a lighter hand than Helios's on the reins, when they understood that the god who usually drove them was not there, they bolted. They went too high and the earth below grew cold as the sun moved away from its proper path. Then they swerved too low and the earth burned. Forests caught fire. Rivers dried. The Sahara Desert, the Greeks said, was scorched into its barrenness by Phaeton's disastrous ride. The Nile, which flooded every year with the life-giving water that made Egyptian civilization possible, ran to hide in its deepest channels to escape the heat. The earth itself cried out to Zeus, and Zeus had to act. The daily management of the solar crossing was not a ceremonial role. It was a technical one, and Helios performed it with the precision and the dedication of a being who understood that the world's survival depended on his getting it right. He saw everything as he crossed. From his height above the earth, from the vantage point of the zenith of the sky, he could see in every direction simultaneously. He saw the fields and the cities and the mountains and the seas. He saw what gods were doing on the earth and what mortals were doing. He saw what was hidden in valleys and what was happening on mountain peaks. Nothing that occurred in daylight was invisible to him. This made him the most reliable witness in the mythology. When there was a question about what had happened somewhere, when the truth of an event was in dispute, Helios could be asked. He had been there. He had seen. His testimony was the testimony of the sky itself. As Helios descended in the west, Selene rose in the east. Not every night. This is the crucial structural difference between Helios and Selene. Helios came every day without exception. The sun rose every morning. The absence of the sun meant the end of the world. There was no mythology in which the sun failed to appear and the world continued. Selene was different. The moon was absent from the sky for 3 days out of every 29. The new moon, when the moon's illuminated face was turned entirely away from the earth, left the night sky without its secondary light. And the moon's presence varied from full brightness to thin crescent across its monthly cycle, so that even on the nights when it appeared differently. This variability was fundamental to how the ancient Greeks experienced the moon and thought about the moon goddess. Selene was not constant. She was cyclical. She grew and diminished and disappeared and returned. And this cycle, the monthly waxing and waning, was one of the most important rhythms that the ancient world tracked and built around. The months of the Greek calendar were lunar. The word for month in most ancient languages was derived from the word for moon. The moon was the clock of the month, the way the sun was the clock of the day. Selene's cycle determined the timing of festivals and market days and the agricultural operations that were believed to be best performed at specific phases of the lunar month. Planting by moonlight was not superstition. It was the expression of the belief that the moon's phases, like everything else in the sky, had specific effects on specific things in the world below. Selene's light was different from Helios's light in its quality as well as its quantity. Moonlight was not simply diluted sunlight, though that is precisely what it was in physical terms. It was reflected light, cooler and more diffuse, and with a quality that affected the appearance of things differently from direct sunlight. Colors looked different in moonlight. Shapes looked different. The world itself looked different. The Greeks understood that the moon did not generate its own light. They knew it was reflecting the sun's light. This knowledge was encoded in the mythology and the relationship between Helios and Selene as siblings. The same parent light, Hyperion, expressed differently. One direct and generating, one reflective and receiving. Brother and sister, day and night, the warm gold of the sun and the cool silver of the moon. Selene drove her own chariot too, 2 white horses gleaming in the darkness. She moved across the night sky from east to west as her brother moved across the daytime sky, but more slowly, rising later each night as the month progressed, following the path that the moon's monthly cycle required. She looked down at the sleeping world. Everything on the Earth's surface that faced the night sky was visible to Selene by the light of her own movement. The sleeping cities and the silent fields and the ocean shining with reflected moonlight and the mountains casting their shadows across the valleys. She saw it all, differently from how Helios saw it, in silver rather than gold, in the softer, more forgiving light that the night provided. Together, Helios and Selene and Eos covered the complete arc of the sky's light from the first hint of brightness before dawn to the last silver fading of the moon before a new day began. Eos prepared. Helios crossed. Selene presided over the night. And then Eos returned. The cycle repeated without end. Without variation in its essential structure, with only the seasonal variation in the length of the day and the monthly variation in the moon's presence to modify the basic pattern. This was the clock by which the ancient world lived. The only clock, the unvarying daily cycle of the sun, the monthly cycle of the moon, the threshold of the dawn that separated them, all three governed by divine beings who showed up without fail and performed their functions with the precision that the world required. When you understand this, you understand something important about what the ancient Greeks believed about the divine. The gods were not simply powerful beings who intervened occasionally in human affairs and were otherwise uninvolved. The gods were the ongoing maintenance of the world. Without Helios, no day. Without Selene, no month. No tide, no night navigation. Without Eos, no transition, no threshold, no preparation for what came next. The world worked because divine beings made it work. Every day, without recognition and without rest, because the world depended on it. And in the Golden Age, when the Titans were in their full expression and the world was as it was supposed to be, this dependability was felt as abundance. The sun rose and set at the proper times. The seasons were mild. The light was warm and generous. The night was lit with silver sufficient for safe travel. The dawn came with its colors every morning, and no one yet understood what was being lost, what was already beginning to end in the mind of the being who governed all of it from his golden throne. Three words turning over and over in the mind of Kronos while the sun crossed, and the moon shone, and the dawn came again every morning as it always had. By your own child. The sky was beautiful. The light was faithful. The cycle continued without interruption. And the king who governed the world that all of this illuminated was beginning to plan something that would change it forever. The prophecy was 3 words. In Greek, even fewer. The compression of the ancient language allowed ourunners to say in 3 words what takes a sentence to say in English. You will be overthrown by your own child. The words fell from the wounded sky as ourunners retreated. They fell with the blood. They fell with the birth of Aphrodite and the rising of the Erinyes. They fell into the world and into Kronos, and they did not leave. 3 words. That is all it took. 3 words to take the most powerful being alive and begin the slow transformation that would end with him swallowing his own children in the dark. To understand the prophecy and what it did to Kronos, you first have to understand what prophecy was in the ancient Greek world. Not what we mean when we use the word today, casually, as a synonym for prediction. What the Greeks meant when they spoke of prophecy from the divine world. The ancient Greeks believed that the future was not entirely open, that the broad shape of what was going to happen was fixed, determined, woven into the structure of things by the Moirai, the 3 fates, before the events themselves unfolded. The details could vary. The specific path by which the predetermined end was reached could branch and meander and surprise, but the destination was set. This belief created a specific relationship to divine prophecy. When a god or a prophetic oracle spoke of what was going to happen, they were not making a guess. They were not extrapolating from present conditions to probable future outcomes. They were describing something that was already true, that existed already in the structure of reality, that merely had not yet manifested in the temporal sequence of events. This is why attempts to avoid a prophecy in Greek mythology never work. Not because the characters are stupid, not because they fail to try hard enough, but because the attempt to avoid the prophecy is itself part of the prophecy's fulfillment. The actions taken to prevent the foretold outcome are the very actions that produce it. Oedipus was abandoned by his parents to prevent him from killing his father, and the abandonment set in motion the exact chain of events that led to the killing. The attempt to prevent the prophecy was the mechanism by which the prophecy came true. Kronos knew this, or he should have known it. He was ancient and intelligent, and he had seen how these things worked. He understood that the words of Ourenas were not a warning about something that might happen. They were a description of something that would happen, something that was, in the deepest sense, already true, and he could not accept it. There is a specific quality to the fear that Kronos felt that distinguishes it from ordinary fear. Ordinary fear is the fear of something that might happen, something uncertain, something that exists as a possibility rather than a certainty. You can address ordinary fear by addressing the source of the uncertainty, by making the outcome less likely, by taking precautions, by changing the conditions that make the feared outcome possible. The fear that Kronos felt was different. He feared something that was certain, something that the universe had already determined. And the fear of a certain outcome is qualitatively different from the fear of a possible outcome, because there is nothing that addresses it. There is no precaution sufficient. There is no arrangement of circumstances that removes the risk. The outcome is coming regardless. This creates a specific kind of psychological torment. The mind knows the thing is coming. The mind cannot accept the thing coming. And because the mind cannot accept it and cannot prevent it, it spends its energy trying to find the loophole, the interpretation, the way out, running through every possible reading of the prophecy, looking for the one that makes it less absolute, the one that leaves room for an exception. By your own child. What if he had no children? That would prevent it. If no child existed to overthrow him, the prophecy could not be fulfilled. It was not a perfect solution. It was not even, on reflection, a real solution, because the prophecy did not say that a child would definitely be born and then definitely overthrow him. The prophecy said that the overthrow would come from a child, which implied a child would exist, which implied that preventing the child's existence was not a real option, because the prophecy had already accounted for that possibility in its formulation. But the terrified mind does not think clearly. The terrified mind reaches for the solution that seems to address the immediate fear, even if that solution only postpones the inevitable and creates new problems in the process. Kronos reached for the solution. The golden age continued around him. This is the detail that makes Kronos' situation so particular. The world was not in crisis. The world was in the best condition it had ever been. The earth gave freely. There was no war. The Titans moved through their domains with their full power and their full presence. Kronos himself was at the height of his authority. Everything external was working, and everything internal was not. The fear did not announce itself with drama. It did not arrive as a crisis or a confrontation. It was more like a quiet sound that could be heard under every other sound. A tone that persisted through every activity and every conversation and every moment of the day. Present when he woke and present when he slept and present in the space between waking and sleeping where the mind is most exposed to the things it carries. He ruled with intelligence. The accounts of the Golden Age suggest a ruler who was capable and effective. The world he governed was peaceful and abundant. He was not a bad ruler in the external, observable sense. He was not cruel to his subjects or arbitrary in his decisions or wasteful of the world's resources. He governed well. But inside that good governance, inside that effective and capable and intelligent ruler, the prophecy was growing, like a root growing through stone, slowly, patiently, invisible from the outside, breaking apart the foundations of things from within. Rhea was with him. warm and present, and the goddess of the flow of time, the force that could not be stopped. She moved through the world with the ease of someone who accepted it as it was, who felt no need to hold it in place or prevent it from moving forward. She was everything that Kronos was not in his inner life. She flowed where he calculated. She accepted where he resisted. She was present to the world where he was increasingly absent from it, consumed by the thing he was trying to figure out. She was going to bear his children. This was as certain as the prophecy. They were together. They were divine beings at the height of their power. Children were what the union of such beings produced. And every child would be the prophecy made possible. At some point, the calculation resolved itself into a decision. The decision was not arrived at in a moment of rage or desperation. That is important to understand. Kronos was the most calculating of the Titans. He thought things through. He was capable of the kind of cold, clear analysis that stripped away emotion and sentiment and looked at situations as they actually were rather than as he wished they were. And the analysis produced the following logic. A child would come. The child would grow. The child would, according to the prophecy, overthrow him. Therefore, the child must not be allowed to grow. The child must not be allowed to remain in the world where it could develop into the threat the prophecy described. The solution was not to kill the child. The Greeks were precise about this. Kronos did not kill his children. He swallowed them. He took them inside his body. He contained them. They were alive, inside him, preserved but imprisoned, unable to be in the world, unable to grow into what the prophecy said they would grow into. This distinction matters. There was something in Kronos that could not quite bring himself to kill his own children. The same quality that had made him hesitate when Gaia first came to him with the sickle, the moment that his siblings had fled from. He could act when he needed to. He could do the hard thing. But killing his children was beyond what he could do. So he found the alternative. Swallowing was not killing. It was containing. It was the prophylactic measure that his fear required without quite crossing the line that his nature could not cross. It was also, as we will see, completely insufficient. There is something that the Greeks understood about prophecy that is worth examining carefully here. The prophecy did not simply predict what would happen to Kronos. It described the pattern that had already happened to Outranas and would continue to happen until someone found a way to break the cycle. Outranas was afraid of being overthrown by his children and imprisoned them. His imprisonment produced the conditions for Kronos to overthrow him. Kronos was afraid of being overthrown by his children and swallowed them. His swallowing produced the conditions for Zeus to overthrow him. Zeus would also have reason to fear being overthrown, and his story would involve its own version of the same pattern, though he would ultimately find a way through it that his predecessors had not found. The prophecy was not just a prediction about Kronos. It was a description of a law, the law of succession. The law that says power always produces the conditions for its own displacement. That the act of holding power generates, by its very nature, the forces that will eventually challenge it. That suppression does not prevent what is suppressed from becoming powerful. It ensures it. Kronos heard the prophecy as a personal threat, as something addressed specifically to him. Something that he could personally address by taking personal action. He did not hear it as a description of a pattern, as a statement about how power works, as a warning about the consequences of fear. And because he did not hear it that way, he could not respond to it in the way that would have actually addressed it. The response that would have addressed it was acceptance, the willingness to allow his children to exist and to grow and to find a way of relating to them that did not produce the very conditions the prophecy described. the choice to be different from Uranus, to break the cycle at the point where it was given to him to break it. He did not make that choice. He made the other choice, the same choice Uranus had made, and in making it, he guaranteed exactly what he was trying to prevent. Rhea was carrying their first child. She did not yet know what Kronos had decided. She felt the child growing. She felt the particular fullness of carrying new life, the specific weight and presence of a being developing within her body. She felt connected to what was coming in the way that all parents feel connected to what is coming, with anticipation and with the specific quality of love that exists even before its object has fully arrived. She did not know that her husband had looked at this coming child and seen a threat, that he had looked at the same new life that she felt with warmth and had felt with calculation, that he had run through the analysis and arrived at the decision and was waiting for the child to be born so that he could do what his fear required. The golden age was at its height, beautiful and abundant and already containing, in the mind of the being who governed it, the decision that would end it. The first child was almost here. Her name would be Hestia. She would be the goddess of the hearth, the most gentle and most essential of all the Olympians, the keeper of the sacred fire, the divine presence in the warmth of every home. And her father was going to swallow her. The fear was ready, and the wheel, which had turned once when Kronos struck his father, was preparing to turn again. Hestia was born, the first child of Kronos and Rhea, the first Olympian, the first divine being of the new generation that the prophecy had said would come and that Kronos had spent his growing dread preparing to address. She was born in the way that divine beings are born, not through the processes of mortal birth with its duration and its difficulty and its specific physical experience, but through the particular mechanism by which gods arrive in the world. She was simply there, present, new, a being who had not existed and now did. And she was remarkable. Of all the Olympians, Hestia is the one who receives the fewest stories. There is no myth in which she is the central figure. No adventure, no love affair, no conflict, no transformation. The ancient sources mention her primarily in relation to others, as the first child of Kronos, as the goddess who declined Poseidon and Apollo when they sought her hand in marriage and chose instead to remain a virgin, as the deity who was sometimes said to have given her throne on Olympus to Dionysus when the wine god arrived, and there was a question of who would make room. The absence of dramatic stories about Hestia is not a sign of her insignificance. It is a sign of her nature. Hestia was the goddess of the hearth, and the hearth does not have adventures. The hearth does not go to war or fall in love or transform into animals or visit the underworld or have complicated relationships with mortals. The hearth simply burns, steadily, faithfully, in the same place, every day, whether anyone is watching or not. This was Hestia, the divine principle of constancy, of the reliable warmth at the center of every home, of the fire that was lit in the morning and tended through the day and kept burning through the night, because a fire that went out was an ill omen, a sign that something was wrong in the household, a break in the continuity that the household depended on. Every Greek home had a hearth, not just the wealthy homes, not just the homes of the aristocracy or the priests or the rulers. Every home, the poorest farmer's dwelling, had its hearth as surely as the greatest palace. And in every one of those hearths, in every one of those fires, Hestia was present, not symbolically, not metaphorically, actually present. The fire was her. Her presence was the warmth. Before any meal was eaten in a Greek household, before any significant act was undertaken, the hearth was honored. A small offering was made, a moment of acknowledgement. This was not elaborate ritual. It was the daily practice of recognizing that the warmth that made the home habitable, the fire that cooked the food and kept away the cold and gathered the family together in the evening, was a divine gift, was Hestia's gift, and gifts deserved acknowledgement. She was also the goddess of the state hearth. Every city in Greece maintained a public hearth where the sacred fire of Hestia burned continuously. This was the city's hearth. The domestic principle scaled up to the civic level. When colonists left Greece to found new settlements, they took fire from the home city's hearth with them. The new city's sacred fire was lit from the old city's fire. The continuity of flame was the continuity of civilization. Hestia's fire traveled with the Greeks as they spread across the Mediterranean world, connecting every new settlement back to its origin through the unbroken lineage of flame. This is who was born first. This is the being that Kronos looked at and felt the prophecy shudder in him. The gentlest god, the most essential god, the one whose domain was not power or beauty or war or fate, but simply the warm center of home. The one whose presence made a dwelling a place where people could live. The one who asked for nothing and gave everything. He swallowed her. The mythology describes it without ceremony. Kronos took Hestia and swallowed her whole. There is a bluntness to this fact that the imagination initially resists. The mind wants to soften it somehow, to find a reading in which it is less than what it says. But the mythology does not offer that softening. Kronos swallowed his firstborn child, the first Olympian, the goddess of the hearth. He opened his mouth, and he took her in, and she was gone from the world. She was not dead. This is the detail that the mythology is specific about. The swallowed children were alive inside Kronos, aware, conscious, existing in the darkness of their father's body in a state that was neither life as it was supposed to be lived nor death. A third state, a suspended state, a waiting. What was it like to be Hestia in that waiting? The mythology does not tell us. The inner experience of the swallowed gods is one of the silences of the ancient sources, one of the places where the story moves on without exploring the experience of those most directly affected by what happened. We know they were alive. We know they were eventually freed. What passed in the time between, in the dark inside their father, we do not know. But the fire she embodied did not go out entirely. That is implicit in her survival. The hearths of the world still burned. Homes still had their warmth. The sacred fire still gave light. Something of Hestia persisted in the world even in her absence from it, because the principle she embodied was too fundamental to vanish simply because the goddess who embodied it had been removed. And Rhea, the mythology does not dwell on this. It is one of the places where the ancient sources move quickly past something that deserves more attention than it receives. Rhea held her firstborn child. She felt the specific warmth and weight of the new life she had produced. She looked at what she and Kronos had made together. And then Kronos took the child and swallowed her. There is no word in any language adequate to what Rhea felt. Not grief, exactly, because grief implies the permanent loss of someone who is gone. Hestia was not gone in that sense. She was present, inside Kronos, alive and aware. But she was unreachable. She was there and not there simultaneously. Rhea could not hold her, could not speak to her, could not know what Hestia was experiencing, could not do anything at all to reach her or help her or make the situation better. This particular form of suffering, the suffering of a parent who knows their child is alive and present and unreachable, is one of the most specific and the most devastating experiences that the mythology describes. Gaia felt it when Aurenas imprisoned the Cyclopes and the Cinemanes inside her own body. Rhea felt it when Kronos swallowed their children. The same structure of grief, passed from one generation to the next, as if the pattern were determined to repeat itself until someone finally found a different way through. Rhea was a titan. She was ancient and powerful beyond any human measure. The goddess of the flow of time, the force of generation, the maternal principle in its most fundamental form. And she had no recourse. Not yet. Not against Kronos, who was the ruler of the world, who was the most powerful being alive, who had done what he had done in the grip of a fear that she could not argue him out of and could not address by any means available to her. So she held what she felt. She carried it inside her the way Gaia had carried her imprisoned children inside her. In silence, in patience, in the long waiting that the deeply wronged must sometimes do before the moment for action arrives. The swallowing of Hestia is the moment the golden age begins to end. Not dramatically, not with a visible change in the world. The earth still gave its fruits. The seasons were still mild. There was still no war. From the outside, from any observable perspective, nothing had changed. But something had changed in the structure of things. Something had been introduced into the world that the Golden Age was not designed to contain. A tyrant. Not a tyrant in the external sense. Not a ruler who oppressed his subjects or misused his power in the governance of the world. But a tyrant in the intimate sense. A being who used the most fundamental relationship available to imprison those who should have been protected by it. Kronos was a father who swallowed his child. Whatever he was before that moment, whatever he became after it, this is what he was at the moment it happened. The relationship between parent and child, the most basic and most sacred relationship in the ancient Greek world, the relationship that Hera would one day govern as the goddess of marriage and family. The relationship that the Erinyes had been born to protect when it was violated. This relationship had been turned against itself, used as the instrument of the very harm it was supposed to prevent. The first swallowing was the first crack in the foundation of the Golden Age. The surface remained intact. The abundance continued. But underneath, in the deep structure of things, something had broken. Something that would not be repaired until the cycle completed itself and the swallowed children found their way out and the world reorganized itself around a new order. Hestia was in the dark. The hearth fire still burned in every home. And Rhea was carrying their second child. Demeter was born, the second child of Kronos and Rhea. And from the first moment of her existence, there was something about her that was unlike any other divine being who had come before. A quality of connection to the earth that exceeded even the connection of Gaia herself. Because where Gaia was the earth in its totality, in its geological vastness, Demeter was the earth in its relationship to life, to growing things, to the specific miracle of a seed planted in soil that becomes, through water and warmth and time, a plant that bears grain that sustains human existence. She was the goddess of the harvest, the goddess of grain, the goddess of the agricultural cycle that made human civilization possible. Before we follow her into the darkness of Kronos' body, it is worth understanding what she represented. Because Demeter is one of the most important gods in the entire Greek pantheon, not in terms of drama or adventure, but in terms of what life actually depended on. The ancient Greeks were farmers. Not all of them, not exclusively, but fundamentally. The civilization that produced the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Parthenon and the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle was built on grain, on wheat and barley planted in autumn and harvested in late spring. on the olive tree that took 20 years to mature but then produced its fruit for centuries, on the grape that made wine, on the fig and the pomegranate, and all the other cultivated plants that turned the rocky landscape of Greece into something that could support human life at the scale that Greek civilization required. All of this was Demeter's domain, not in an abstract, symbolic sense, in a direct and practical sense. When the grain grew, Demeter was giving her gift. When the harvest was abundant, Demeter was pleased or at peace or in the proper relationship with the world. When the harvest failed, when drought or frost or disease destroyed the crops, Demeter was withholding something, or suffering something, or expressing through the failure of the grain some disruption in her own divine condition. The most famous story about Demeter is the story of her daughter Persephone's abduction by Hades. When Persephone was taken to the underworld, Demeter's grief was so complete, so total, so absolute that she withdrew her gifts from the world. She stopped the grain from growing. She let the fields go bare. She walked the earth in her sorrow without tending what she was supposed to tend. And the world starved. The earth went barren. Animals had nothing to eat. Humans had nothing to eat. Even the gods, who depended on the worship and sacrifice of humans, began to be affected. And Zeus had to intervene, had to arrange the return of Persephone for part of each year, because the alternative was the end of all life on the surface of the world. This story, which we will tell in full in a later episode, reveals something essential about Demeter's power. She was not simply the goddess of a pleasant and desirable thing. She was the goddess of the thing that everything else depended on. Without grain, there was no civilization. Without civilization, there were no temples. Without temples, there were no sacrifices. Without sacrifices, the relationship between humans and gods that sustained the entire divine order of the Greek world would dissolve. Demeter, at the bottom of this chain, was the foundation of it all. She was also the goddess of the mystery. The Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred and most secret religious ceremonies in the ancient Greek world, were held in her honor at Eleusis, near Athens. Thousands of initiates were admitted to these mysteries over the centuries. They included some of the most famous figures of the ancient world. Plato was initiated. The Emperor Augustus was initiated. Cicero was initiated. All of them underwent a secret ceremony that they were sworn never to reveal in detail, that was said to transform the initiate's relationship to death and to the afterlife, that promised something beyond ordinary existence to those who participated. What happened in those ceremonies was never fully recorded. We have fragments and hints and the testimony of initiates who described their experience in general terms without revealing the specific content. What we know is that the mysteries centered on Demeter and Persephone and the cycle of descent and return, that they involved some form of dramatic reenactment of Persephone's abduction and Demeter's grief and the eventual reunion. That the experience of participating in this reenactment was transformative in a way that participants consistently described as one of the most significant experiences of their lives. The goddess whose story was at the center of the most important religious ceremony in the Greek world was born second, was swallowed second, was in the dark inside her father while the world above continued its golden age abundance, while the grain grew in fields that belonged to her domain, while the harvest cycles turned without her presence. Rhea gave birth to Demeter. She held her. She felt the particular quality of this new divine life, different from Hestia's in the specific way that a goddess of the harvest is different from a goddess of the hearth. Where Hestia's presence was warm and steady like a well-tended fire, Demeter's presence was alive in a different way. It had the quality of green-growing things, the specific vitality of a plant in full growth. The warmth not of fire, but of the sun falling on a field of grain in late spring when the harvest was still weeks away, but the outcome was already certain. Rhea felt this. She understood who this child was and what she would be and what her presence in the world would mean. And Kronos swallowed her. The second time was not easier than the first. This is something the mythology does not say explicitly, but that is implicit in everything that follows. Each swallowing was its own particular grief. Each one was not simply a repetition of the previous one, but a new and specific loss. The loss of this particular child with this particular nature and this particular potential. Hestia was the warmth of home. Demeter was the fertility of the earth. Two of the most fundamental gifts that existence offered to the living world, both of them now in the dark inside Kronos. Both of them present and unreachable. Both of them alive in the suspended waiting state that was the only existence available to the swallowed gods. The grain still grew in the fields. This is the remarkable thing. The divine principle of agricultural fertility was imprisoned inside the ruler of the world, and the crops still grew. Life found a way to continue even in the absence of the goddess who governed it. Or perhaps Demeter's presence inside Kronos was still somehow acting on the world through him, seeping out through the thin boundary between her divine nature and the world she was supposed to inhabit. But the grain that grew was not the same grain it would have been with Demeter free in the world. Something was different. Something was slightly less than what it could have been. The world was managing in her absence. But managing is not the same as flourishing. The abundance of the golden age continued, but with a quality of the borrowed. A harvest maintained by habit and by the residual influence of the divine principle that had been removed from it. Each swallowing added weight to what Rhea carried. After the first, she held something that had no name. The loss of Hestia, the first child, the unexpected violence of it, the incomprehension of what Kronos had done and why and whether it would happen again. That was the first weight. After the second, she began to understand that it would happen again, that this was not a singular act committed in a moment of fear that had passed. This was a policy, a decision that Kronos had made and intended to maintain for every child they produced. The second swallowing confirmed what the first had suggested. This was going to continue. The understanding of a pattern is its own specific grief, worse, in some ways, than the original event. The original event could be held as an aberration, an anomaly, something that happened once and would not happen again. The second event ended that possibility. The second event said, "This is what your life will be. This is what your children's existence will be. This is the world you inhabit." Rhea was a titan. She was ancient and powerful. She was the goddess of the flow of time and the force of generation. She had the resources of her divine nature available to her in ways that no mortal mother could have. But none of those resources addressed the specific situation she was in. She could not fight Kronos directly. He was the ruler of the world and the most powerful being alive. She could not appeal to any authority above him, because there was no authority above him. She could not leave, because there was nowhere to go, and leaving would not free her children. She was in it, completely and inescapably in it. And the next child was already coming. Hera was next, the goddess who would one day be the queen of the gods, the divine guardian of marriage and family, the being whose existence was organized around the sacred bond between those who had committed to each other. the most regal and most proud of all the Olympians. She too would be swallowed, and Rhea would hold another child for a moment that was too brief. And then she would hold nothing, and the weight would grow heavier. And the patience that Gaia had taught through example, the patience of the earth that holds everything and waits for the right moment, would begin to develop in Rhea as well. Not easily, not comfortably, but necessarily, because patience was the only tool she had. The harvest still came in the fields. The grain still grew, but Demeter was in the dark, and the third child was already on its way. Hera was born, the third child of Kronos and Rhea, and from the first moment of her existence, there was something about her that announced itself, a quality of presence that did not request attention but commanded it. The other children who had come before her, Hestia with her steady warmth and Demeter with her vital connection to growing things, had arrived with the quality of their domains already in them. Hera arrived with the quality of authority. She was not yet a queen. The world she was born into did not yet have the structure in which she would be a queen. The Olympian order was still in the future. The 12 thrones on Olympus had not been built. The divine hierarchy that would eventually place her at Zeus's side as the queen of everything had not yet been established. None of that existed. But Hera arrived as if it did, as if the title were not something that would be given to her, but something she had always been, regardless of whether any formal arrangement acknowledged it. This quality, this innate regalness, this sense that she understood the proper order of things and expected it to be maintained, would define her for the entirety of the mythology. It was present from birth. It was present in the moment before Kronos swallowed her. Hera was the goddess of marriage, the goddess of the sacred bond between those who had committed to each other, the divine guardian of the institution that organized Greek society at its most fundamental level. But this description, accurate as it is, does not capture what Hera actually was. Because Hera was not simply the patron of a social institution. She was the embodiment of a principle. The principle that commitment means something. That the promise made in marriage is not a convenience to be set aside when it becomes inconvenient. That the bond between people who have chosen each other creates obligations that persist regardless of whether honoring those obligations is pleasant or easy. This principle, in the abstract, sounds reasonable. It sounds like something that any organized society would affirm. And in the abstract, the Greeks did affirm it. They understood that without the stability of the marital bond, without the reliable structure of the household and its legitimate lineage, the whole architecture of their social world would become uncertain. Property rights depended on legitimate succession. Political alliances depended on marriages that held. The transmission of everything from one generation to the next depended on the stability of the family unit. Hera was the divine force that said this structure mattered, that it was sacred, that violations of it had consequences. The tragedy of Hera's own existence in the mythology is that she was the goddess of the sacred bond married to the god who violated that bond most comprehensively and most repeatedly of any being in the mythology. Zeus was unfaithful to Hera with a consistency and a variety that is almost cataloging in the ancient sources. Mortal women, divine beings, nymphs, titans, anything that caught his attention at any given moment. The list of Zeus's lovers is one of the longest lists in the mythology, and every one of them was a violation of the marriage that Hera embodied. Her anger in response to these violations has often been characterized as jealousy, as the petty vindictiveness of a wife who could not accept the inevitable. This characterization misses what the mythology is actually saying about her. Hera was not jealous in the ordinary sense. She was the goddess of marriage. When Zeus violated the marriage, he was not simply wronging her as an individual. He was violating the principle she was. He was doing to the sacred bond what Kronos had done to his children, using the most fundamental relationship available as an instrument of harm rather than protection. Her responses to Zeus's infidelities were often fierce and sometimes cruel, targeting not Zeus himself, but the women and the children. This too is misread if we judge it by modern standards. In the context of the mythology, Hera's pursuit of the illegitimate children of Zeus was the pursuit of the consequences of the violation. She was not simply a wronged wife taking out her anger on innocence. She was the divine law of the marital bond enforcing itself against the products of its violation. This does not make her actions sympathetic by every standard, but it makes them comprehensible in the terms the mythology was operating with. Hera was proud. This is the quality that every ancient source emphasizes about her. Not arrogance. Exactly, because arrogance implies an inflation of worth beyond its actual level. What Hera had was an accurate sense of what she was worth, combined with an absolute refusal to accept treatment that fell below what that worth demanded. She was the queen of the gods. She knew she was the queen of the gods, and she expected to be treated accordingly, not as a favor, not as something that Zeus granted her by choice, but as what was right and what was owed. This pride expressed itself in the myth of the judgment of Paris, when Paris was asked to choose the fairest among Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena. Hera offered him kingdoms, power, the rulership of the greatest territories in the mortal world. She did not offer this as a bribe, exactly, though that is how it appears in the story. She offered it as the natural consequence of choosing her. If you chose Hera, you chose the queen of the gods, and the queen of the gods came with the power and the authority that befitted a queen. Paris chose Aphrodite and the most beautiful woman in the world, and Hera's response to being passed over was as fierce as everything else about her. She was not small. She was never small. Even in the moments when the mythology shows her at her least sympathetic, when she is pursuing Heracles across his 12 labors or tormenting Io in her transformed state, there is a grandeur to what she does. She acts on a large scale. She pursues with the persistence and the thoroughness of someone who takes seriously what she takes seriously. This was the being who was born third, who arrived with the authority of a queen in a world that did not yet have a queen. Rhea held Hera. She looked at this child who had arrived with such presence, such unmistakable authority, such quality of knowing who she was from the first moment. She felt the weight and the specific character of this new life. And she understood, with the understanding that comes from having already been through this twice, what was going to happen next. There was no surprise. That was perhaps the worst thing about the third time. The first time there had been shock. The second time there had been the horror of confirmation. The third time there was something worse than either of those. The third time there was the settled, cold, complete knowledge of exactly what was about to happen and the complete inability to prevent it. Kronos reached out. Rhea did not fight him. She could not fight him. She was a titan and she was ancient and powerful. But Kronos was the most powerful being alive and the ruler of everything, and there was no version of direct confrontation between them that ended well for her or for the child she was holding. She had understood this after the first time. She had confirmed it after the second. Fighting was not the answer. Not now. Not yet. Kronos swallowed Hera, the queen of the gods, the goddess of marriage, the divine embodiment of the sacred bond. In the dark inside her father, alongside her sisters Hestia and Demeter. Three divine women, three fundamental principles of the world's order, all of them imprisoned inside the being who was supposed to be their father and their protector. The marriage between Kronos and Rhea continued, the ruler of the world and his queen, going through the motions of the Golden Age. The world outside still abundant, the seasons still mild, the cosmic order still intact in its visible, observable aspects. And inside Kronos, in the dark, three goddesses waited. There is something deeply specific about Hera being the goddess of marriage and being swallowed by her own father before she was old enough to establish any relationship of her own. Marriage, in the ancient Greek understanding, was the structure through which the proper order of things was maintained across generations. It was how families continued, how property was legitimized, how the bonds between people were formalized and made sacred. And Hera, who would one day be the divine guardian of all of that, began her existence in a state that was the absolute negation of every principle she embodied. She was inside her father, a child imprisoned by the parent who was supposed to protect her, a being whose entire future purpose was to safeguard the sacred bonds of family, beginning her existence in the broken family of Kronos and Rhea. There is something almost deliberately ironic in this, as if the mythology were making a point about the relationship between ideals and the reality from which they emerge. Hera would become the goddess of marriage not despite the fact that her own family of origin was a site of violence and imprisonment, but in some sense because of it. The understanding of what the sacred bond was supposed to be, the fierce insistence on its maintenance, the anger at its violation, all of this was born in a being who had experienced from her first moment of existence what happened when the bonds of family were betrayed. She was in the dark, but she was not diminished by it. Whatever Hera was, she was still Hera in the dark. The queen was still the queen in the darkness inside Kronos. The pride was still there. The authority was still there. The absolute certainty about who she was and what she was worth was still there. You can imprison Hera, but you cannot make her small. After 3 swallowings, Rhea had reached a different place. She was not broken. She was a titan, and titans did not break in the way that mortal things break. But she had been changed in the specific way that enduring something unendurable changes a being. Not destroyed, but altered. Not defeated, but transformed into something harder and colder and more precise than what she had been before. She was learning what Gaia had always known, that sometimes the only tool available is patience, that sometimes the path through a situation that cannot be addressed directly is the path of waiting, of watching, of understanding so thoroughly what you are dealing with that when the moment for action finally arrives, you know exactly what to do. Gaia had waited an age for her moment. She had held the grief of her imprisoned children inside her for longer than any other grief in the mythology had lasted, and she had not acted until the right moment. She had made the sickle. She had asked her question. She had given the sickle to Kronos and watched him use it, and watched him leave the Cyclopes and the Cendamanes in Tartarus, and noted it, and said nothing and waited. Rhea was learning from her. Not yet consciously, not yet with a plan, but in the deep way that the earth teaches those who live on it. Through example, through the quality of what patience looks like when it is genuine and long and ultimately purposeful. The 4th child was coming. Hades, the god of the underworld, the ruler of the realm of the dead, the most misunderstood of all the Olympians. The one whose role in the divine order was perhaps the most necessary and the most thankless. He too would be swallowed. and the weight on Rhea would grow heavier still, and the plan would begin to take shape in the back of her mind. Not yet, not quite yet, but soon. Hades was born, the fourth child of Kronos and Rhea, and from the very first moment, there was something about him that was different from the three who had come before. Not lesser, not diminished, simply different in a way that was difficult to articulate but impossible to miss. Hestia had arrived with warmth, Demeter with vitality, Hera with authority. Hades arrived with weight, not the weight of sadness, not at first, not yet, the weight of substance, the weight of something that understood, without being told, the seriousness of things. The weight of a being who would never be frivolous about anything, who would always take seriously what deserved to be taken seriously, who would approach every situation with the thoroughness that the situation required and no more and no less. He was, from the beginning, the most adult of the gods. Even as a newborn, even before he had spoken a word or made a single choice, there was something in his presence that suggested he had already considered the matter carefully and arrived at an understanding that others would take much longer to reach. This quality, this gravitas, this heaviness of presence would follow him throughout the mythology. It was misread for centuries as darkness, as malevolence, as the evil that popular imagination has consistently and incorrectly attributed to him. Hades was not evil. He was simply serious. He was the god whose domain was the most serious domain in existence, and he was exactly the right being to govern it. Hades was the god of the underworld, the ruler of the realm of the dead, the king of everything that existed below the surface of the living world. And here we need to stop and correct something. Something that has been wrong in the popular imagination for a very long time, and that the mythology itself does not support. Hades was not the god of death. Death was Thanatos, the gentle son of Nyx, whom we have already met. Thanatos was the transition, the crossing from the living state to the dead state, the soft touch that closed the eyes of the dying and carried the soul to where it needed to go. Hades governed what came after the transition was complete, the realm where souls resided once Thanatos had delivered them, the kingdom of those who had already died. He was a king, not an executioner, a ruler, not a killer. He did not cause death any more than a city's mayor causes people to arrive in the city. He received those who came to him. He governed the territory they inhabited. He administered the process by which they were judged and assigned to their appropriate place in the afterlife. This distinction is fundamental to understanding Hades correctly. He was not a being to be feared as a threat. He was a being to be understood as inevitable. He did not pursue you. He did not hunt you. He did not make your death happen sooner or in a worse way than it would have otherwise. He simply waited, with the patience of someone who knew that everyone came eventually, and he received them when they arrived. His kingdom was the underworld. The geography of it was specific and detailed in the ancient sources. The entrance was at various points in the physical world, through caves and through bodies of water that the Greeks identified as passage points. The dead crossed the river Styx on the boat of Charon, the ferryman, who required a coin for passage, which is why the Greeks placed coins on the eyes or in the mouths of their dead. The unpaid dead waited on the far shore for 100 years before they could cross, a purgatory of hovering that the Greeks considered one of the worst fates available, which is why proper burial rites were so important. Inside the underworld were three judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, three former mortals, kings and wise men in their lives, who now served as the arbiters of where each soul would go after death. They heard the case of each soul. They considered the life that had been lived, and they made their judgment. Those who had lived extraordinary lives of virtue and heroism went to Elysium, the Elysian fields, a paradise of perpetual ease and beauty where the great heroes of the mythology spent their afterlives. Achilles was there. Many of the great figures of the heroic age rested in Elysium. It was not simply a reward for goodness in the general sense. It was a specific reward for the specific quality of life that the Greeks valued most highly. Those who had committed the greatest crimes, who had offended the gods directly, who had done things that the divine order could not simply process and file away, went to Tartarus, the deep abyss, the place that had held the Cyclopes and the Cendamaids, the place where punishments were designed to fit the crime in ways that were often ingenious and always eternal. Sisyphus, who had cheated death, rolled his boulder up the hill forever. Tantalus, who had violated the hospitality of the gods in the most extreme way imaginable, stood in a pool of water under fruit trees, and whenever he reached for the fruit it withdrew, and whenever he bent to drink the water receded. Ixion, who had attempted to assault Hera, was bound to a spinning wheel of fire for eternity, and everyone else went to the Asphodel Meadows, the vast middle territory of the underworld, a neutral place, not pleasant, not terrible, simply present. The souls who had lived ordinary lives, neither extraordinarily virtuous nor extraordinarily wicked, wandered in the Asphodel Meadows in a reduced and dimmer version of their living existence. They retained something of their identity, but were diminished by death, less than they had been, shadows of themselves. Hades governed all of this, with his queen Persephone, whom we will encounter in a later episode, and his three-headed dog Cerberus, who guarded the entrance and ensured that the living did not enter and the dead did not leave, and the river Styx, whose waters were the most binding oath in creation, and the whole elaborate geography and administration of the kingdom of the dead. He was the wealthiest of the gods. All the gold and silver and precious stones that existed under the earth were in his domain. Everything buried in the earth was technically his, and his population was always growing, never shrinking, because every mortal who died was a new citizen of his kingdom, and no one ever left. His kingdom was the most populous and the most stable in existence. It had no war, no famine, no plague, no economic crisis. It simply received and administered and endured. The misidentification of Hades as evil has ancient roots. The Greeks themselves were uncomfortable with him, not because they thought he was malevolent, but because he represented something they found deeply uncomfortable to think about. Death, the ending of everything they valued. The dissolution of the individual self into something reduced and shadowy. The crossing of a river after which you could not come back. The discomfort with what Hades represented was projected onto the god who represented it. He became, over time, in the popular imagination, not simply the ruler of the dead, but a dark and threatening figure. Later traditions deepened this misreading. By the time the mythology had passed through Roman and then Christian interpretation, Hades had been transformed into something close to a devil. The ruler of the underworld had been conflated with the source of evil. None of this was in the original Greek conception. The original Hades was not evil. He was just and fair and thorough. He did not play favorites. He did not accept bribes, or almost never. When Orpheus came for Eurydice, when the music was so beautiful that even the stones wept, even Hades and Persephone were moved. This is not the response of a being without feeling. This is the response of a being who was usually impartial, but who could be reached by something true enough and beautiful enough. He was also, despite everything, not entirely without compassion. He was a king who accepted what came to him and administered it with the seriousness that the role required. But the mythology gives us glimpses of a being who understood what he governed and what it cost those who came to him. The loss he witnessed, continuously, without respite, was the full sum of human loss. Every death that had ever occurred arrived at his kingdom. Every grief that had ever been felt arrived with the soul of the one who had caused it. He witnessed all of it, forever. You could argue that Hades, of all the gods, understood mortality most completely, because he received its results without being subject to it himself. Rhea held Hades. She felt the weight of him, the specific gravity of this new life. She looked at the fourth child, the god who would one day rule the realm of the dead, and she held him with the knowledge of what was coming. Not hope that this time would be different. Not the faint possibility that Kronos had changed his mind. Just the clear, cold knowledge of exactly what was about to happen. Kronos swallowed him. The god of the underworld began his existence in darkness. In the dark inside his father, alongside his sisters Hestia and Demeter and Hera. For gods now, for divine principles of the world's order, all of them imprisoned in the body of the being who was supposed to be their parent. There is something almost cosmically appropriate about Hades' imprisonment being inside a living body. The god who would one day govern the realm of those trapped between life and death, who would administer the existence of souls in a state that was neither fully alive nor simply nothing, began his own existence in a state that had something of the same quality. Alive but not free, present but not in the world, contained within something larger than himself, waiting for the moment of release. In the dark inside Kronos, the four gods existed in their suspended state. The warmth of Hestia still somehow present. The fertility of Demeter still somehow connected to the fields above. The authority of Hera still intact. And now the weight of Hades, the seriousness of the god of the dead, added to the particular quality of that imprisoned space. What did they know of each other in there? The mythology does not tell us. But they were all there. All four of them. Siblings. Divine beings of the same generation, born from the same parents, sharing the same impossible situation. If they could communicate across the dark, they would have known each other before they knew the world. They would have been, in the most profound sense, each other's first companions. And Rhea was already carrying the fifth. Poseidon would be next, the god who would shake the earth and command the sea. Wild and powerful and ungovernable as the waves, he would one day rule. He was coming, and after him, the sixth, the one who would not be swallowed, the one who would change everything. But not yet, not yet. First Poseidon must be born and swallowed and placed in the dark alongside his siblings. First the pattern must complete itself one more time. First Rhea must endure what she had endured 4 times already, a 5th time. And then, finally, something different. But the weight was growing. Inside Kronos, for gods in the dark. Inside Rhea, something building. Not grief anymore, or not only grief. Something harder than grief. Something that had been refined by repetition into a kind of clarity. A knowledge of exactly what she faced and exactly what it would take to address it. She was becoming what the situation required. She was not there yet, but she was getting there. Poseidon was born, the 5th child of Kronos and Rhea. And from his very first moment in the world, he was unmistakably himself. Where Hestia had arrived with warmth and Demeter with vitality and Hera with authority and Hades with weight, Poseidon arrived with force. Not potential force, not the suggestion of power that might one day be expressed. Immediate, present, barely contained force. The kind that did not wait for permission or for circumstances to be right. The kind that expressed itself simply because it was there and it was what it was. He was the sea before the sea had a master. He was the earthquake before the earthquake had a cause. He was the storm surge and the rogue wave and the deep current that pulled ships off course. All of that was in him from the first moment. A wildness that was not violence exactly, not aggression exactly, but something more fundamental. The quality of the ocean itself, which is not angry when it destroys and not generous when it provides, which is simply what it is, vast and powerful and completely indifferent to what you need it to be. Poseidon was the god of the sea. This is the most familiar thing about him, and it is true, but it is not the whole truth. He was also the god of earthquakes. In Greek, he was called Enosikthon, the earth shaker. Not because he was confused with an earth deity, not because the Greeks had made some category error in assigning him this role, but because the Greeks understood, through the direct physical experience of living on one of the most seismically active regions of the planet, that the sea and the earthquake were connected. Greece shakes. It has always shaken. The Aegean region sits at the intersection of multiple tectonic plates whose interactions produce both volcanic activity and frequent, sometimes devastating earthquakes. The Greeks felt the ground move under them regularly. They also knew that the sea floor, when disturbed by the same forces that caused earthquakes, could produce the great waves that arrived at coastlines without warning and destroyed everything in their path. The wave and the earthquake came from the same place. They were expressions of the same force. Poseidon governed both. He also governed horses. This is the association that surprises people most when they first encounter it. The god of the sea and horses? The connection is less arbitrary than it appears. The ancient Greeks observed that the waves of the sea, especially the white-capped waves of a rough sea, had something of the quality of galloping horses. They moved in herds. They broke forward with the force of something running. The white foam of a breaking wave looked, to a people who were closely familiar with horses, like the manes of horses in full gallop. Poseidon was said to have created the first horse by striking his trident on the ground, and horses were sacred to him. He was one of the most important gods in the pantheon, not necessarily the most beloved, not the one to whom the most prayers were addressed or the most temples built, but one of the most important, because the things he governed were among the most consequential for the Greeks. They lived on a peninsula surrounded by water on three sides. They were a maritime people. The sea was their highway and their food source and their connection to everything outside Greece. And the sea was also their greatest danger. The sea that carried their ships and their trade and their colonies across the Mediterranean world was the same sea that drowned their sailors and swallowed their fleets. Poseidon, governing this sea, was both the provider and the threat, both the enabler and the danger, both the force that made Greek civilization possible at the scale it achieved and the force that could, in a moment of storm, destroy everything that civilization had built. His temperament in the mythology reflects this duality. He was the most volatile of the Olympians, the most easily offended, the one whose anger lasted longest and expressed itself most dramatically. Odysseus spent 10 years trying to get home after the Trojan War, and the reason he spent 10 years was that he had blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops who was Poseidon's son. Poseidon's response to this insult was to make Odysseus's journey home as difficult as the sea could be made. 10 years of storms and shipwrecks and delays and dangers, all because Odysseus had hurt his son. This is not an unreasonable response in the context of the mythology's moral universe. Poseidon's son had been harmed. Poseidon responded as a father whose child had been hurt would respond. The problem was the scale. The problem was that when Poseidon was angry, the sea was angry, and when the sea was angry, everyone who depended on the sea paid the price. Not just Odysseus. Every ship on the Aegean. Every sailor who happened to be at sea during the period of Poseidon's wrath. The personal grievance of the god expressed itself as a meteorological event affecting everyone. This is what it meant to have a god who was also a force of nature. The personal and the impersonal were the same thing. Poseidon's mood and the sea's behavior were not separate phenomena. They were the same phenomenon viewed from two different angles. From the human angle, you saw the storm. From the divine angle, you saw a god who was angry. Both were true simultaneously. The Greeks had a specific and detailed understanding of the sea's geography that was not simply practical knowledge, but also mythological knowledge. Every significant body of water in the Mediterranean world had its divine presence, its story, its relationship to the larger divine order. The Mediterranean itself was Poseidon's primary domain, but within it, different regions had different qualities and different associations. The Aegean, the sea between Greece and Asia Minor, was the most familiar and the most heavily traveled. The Adriatic to the west, the Pontus, the Black Sea, accessible through the narrow straits at Byzantium. Each of these was a distinct region with its own character and its own relationship to the Titan Oceanus who encircled everything. The depths of the sea were as geographically specific in the mythology as the surface. Poseidon's palace was at the bottom of the Aegean, built from coral and sea gold and the materials of the deep ocean floor. He drove his chariot across the sea surface when he traveled, the wheels of it not sinking below the water but running on its surface, the horses of the sea drawing him forward, the fish and the sea creatures of every kind accompanying him in his passage. When Poseidon moved across the sea responded, calmed before him or rose at his direction. The sea did not simply contain Poseidon. The sea was his body in the same way that the earth was Gaia's body. He had children with the sea itself. In a sense, the Nereids, who were the 50 daughters of the sea god Nereus, and who inhabited the sea as nymphs inhabit springs and trees. They were the divine presence in specific aspects of the sea's experience. They accompanied ships in fair weather. They could warn of storms. They were present in the breaking of waves on shores and in the deeper movements of currents and tides. Thetis, the mother of Achilles, was a Nereid. Her son was half divine through her sea lineage, and the specific quality of that divinity, the speed and the brilliance and the short burning brightness of a life that was the greatest of its generation, carried something of the sea in it. Poseidon contested with other gods for specific territories. His contest with Athena for Athens is one of the most famous divine competitions in the mythology. He struck his trident on the Acropolis and a saltwater spring gushed forth. Athena planted an olive tree. The Athenians judged that the olive tree was more useful and gave the city to Athena. Poseidon, characteristically, did not take the loss well. He flooded the coastal plain of Attica in his anger. The sea god's response to being denied was, as always, to make the sea do what the sea could do to those who had refused him. He also contested with Hera for Argos, with Helios for Corinth, with Zeus himself over various territories. He was not a god who accepted easily when things did not go his way. He was not a god who deferred without resentment to the authority of others, even Zeus. The stories of Poseidon are consistently the stories of enormous power that pushed against every constraint it encountered. Rhea held Poseidon. She felt the force of him, the wild, barely contained energy of the sea god who had just been born. She felt the quality that was already in him, the quality of the wave and the earthquake and the barely constrained power of deep water. She held this fifth child, the last before the one she had been quietly planning for without knowing the plan yet. Kronos swallowed him. 5 gods now in the dark. Hestia and Demeter and Hera and Hades and Poseidon. 5 divine beings. 5 fundamental principles of the divine order. All of them in the dark inside the ruler of the world, alive and present and unreachable. And the sea outside continued its tides. The waves rose and fell. The depths moved. Poseidon's domain going on without him the way all the domains went on without their governors. The divine principles persisting in the world even in the absence of the divine beings who embodied them. What was it like to be Poseidon in there? If any of the 5 had difficulty with the confinement, surely it was him. The sea god, constrained. The earth shaker, unable to shake anything. The force that expressed itself by moving, contained in a space where no movement was possible. The wildness that defined him, held in a space too small for wildness. The sea outside may have felt it. The mythology does not say. But it is difficult to believe that the sea could be entirely unaffected by the imprisonment of its governing principle. Perhaps there was something different about the sea in the years when Poseidon was inside Kronos. Something slightly less wild, slightly less itself. The way of fire burns lower when the wood is insufficient for its full expression. After 5 swallowings, something clarified in Rhea. It was not a dramatic moment, not a sudden decision, not a flash of insight, not the arrival of a plan fully formed. It was more like the ground settling after a long period of gradual subsidence. The accumulated weight of 5 losses reaching a point of equilibrium that was itself a kind of understanding. She could not continue this way, not because she had reached a limit of endurance, though she had, but because she understood something she had not understood clearly before. That continuing as she was not simply painful. It was participating in what Kronos was doing. Her silence, her acceptance, her going through the motions of the golden age while he swallowed her children one by one, was its own form of complicity in the pattern. She did not know yet exactly what she would do. The plan was not yet formed. But something had crystallized that had not been crystallized before. The willingness to act. The decision, not yet implemented but already made at some deep level, that she would not allow the 6th child to disappear into the dark. She needed help. She knew that much. She could not act alone, not against Kronos, not yet. She needed someone older, wiser, more deeply rooted in the structure of things. Someone who had been planning for longer than Rhea had been suffering. She needed Gaia. She would go to her mother, the oldest being in existence, the being who had already set one cycle of events in motion when she gave Kronos the sickle, the being who had watched Kronos leave the Cyclopes in Tartarus and said nothing and noted it and waited. Gaia had been waiting for exactly this moment. The 6th child was already growing inside Rhea. And for the first time, Rhea was going to ask for help. Rhea went to Gaia. Not immediately. Not in the first shock of the first swallowing, or the second, or the third. Not in the raw grief of each successive loss. She went when she was ready. When the grief had been processed and refined into something harder and clearer and more purposeful. When she had moved from the state of someone enduring something to the state of someone who had decided that endurance was no longer sufficient. She went when she understood that the sixth child was coming and that this time she was going to do something different. What does it mean to go to Gaia? Gaia was the earth. She was not in a specific place. She was every place. She was the ground beneath every foot in the world. She was present in the soil of every field and the stone of every mountain and the bottom of every valley. To go to Gaia was not to travel to a location. It was to go deep, to go down, to press yourself against the earth and ask the earth to hear you. Rhea was a titan. She was ancient and powerful and connected to the world in ways that mortal beings could not be. She could feel Gaia the way she could feel anything fundamental about the structure of existence. She could reach her through the medium of the ground itself, through the deep connection that all beings born of earth maintained with the source of their origin. She went to the earth. She pressed herself into the presence of the oldest being in existence. And she spoke. She told Gaia everything. Not because Gaia did not already know. Gaia was the earth. She felt everything that happened within her and on her and near her. She knew about the swallowed children. She knew about Kronos' fear and what it had produced. She had been feeling the presence of the imprisoned gods inside Kronos the way she felt everything that was inside her domain. But Rhea told her anyway, because there is something in the act of telling that is not simply the transmission of information. There is something in saying the thing aloud to someone who listens, in giving the experience of form and words, in having the experience witnessed and acknowledged by someone outside yourself. Rhea told Gaia because she needed to be heard, because the grief of 5 swallowed children had been held in silence for too long, and the silence itself had become part of the weight. And Gaia listened. Gaia had been waiting for this conversation. She had known it was coming. She had known since the first moment Kronos left the Cyclopes in Tartarus that the pattern was repeating itself. Since the first moment she understood that the son she had chosen as the instrument of justice had simply become a new version of the injustice she had asked him to end. She had watched the swallowings happen, one by one, 5 of them, her own grandchildren disappearing into the dark inside her son, and she had said nothing and done nothing and waited. Not out of indifference, not out of the inability to care, out of the understanding that the time was not right, that acting too soon would produce the wrong outcome, that the situation needed to develop to the point where the right instrument was available and the right plan was viable. The right instrument was the 6th child, the one who had not yet been born, the one who, if protected, would be the being capable of changing what Kronos had made of the world. And the right plan required Rhea to be ready, required her to have reached the place she had now reached, the place of decision, the place of asking, because a plan given to someone who had not yet decided to act was a plan wasted. Gaia had waited for Rhea to come to her, not because Gaia was waiting to be asked, but because the asking was itself evidence that Rhea was ready. Now Rhea was asking. Gaia listened to everything she said. She felt the weight of it. The grief of 5 swallowed children was also her grief. Hestia and Demeter and Hera and Hades and Poseidon were her grandchildren. They were inside Kronos, who was inside the earth, which was inside her. The whole nested darkness of the situation, the swallowed gods inside the king inside the earth inside the oldest being in creation, was her reality as much as it was Rhea's. And when Rhea had finished, Gaia spoke. She told Rhea 3 things. The first thing she told her was to go to Crete, the island in the southern sea, the oldest inhabited place in the Greek world. The island where the mountains were ancient and the caves were deep in the sense of something prior, something that preceded the current order of things, was pervasive in the stone itself. "Go there," she said. "Go there and give birth in secret. Away from Kronos. Away from the sky that still reported everything it saw to the retreated Uranus. Away from any presence that might carry the news back to the one who should not know." The second thing she told her was to leave the child in the care of her nymphs, the divine beings who inhabited the natural features of the island, who lived in its springs and its trees and its deep limestone caves, who were ancient in their own way, ancient with the specific antiquity of things that are embedded in a place rather than moving through the world, that carry the memory of everything that has happened in that place since the beginning. "Leave the child with them," she said. "They will keep him safe. They know how to keep things hidden." The third thing she told her was the most remarkable. "Bring me a stone." That was all. Bring me a stone, a rock, a piece of the earth. Ordinary, gray, unremarkable. Something you could find on any hillside in any part of the world. Something that no one would look at twice. Bring me a stone and wrap it in cloth the way you would wrap a child. And take it back to Kronos. And give it to him as if it were the child. Rhea looked at her mother. She understood the plan. Its elegance and its audacity and its simplicity. She understood that it would work only because of the specific quality of arrogance that Kronos had developed in his long, unchallenged rule. The assumption of safety that made careful checking unnecessary. The certainty that no one would dare to deceive him. That was the crack the plan would fit through. That specific crack in the armor of a being who believed himself too powerful to be fooled. She said yes. It is worth pausing to understand what Gaia was doing in offering this plan, because it was not simply the strategic assistance of a mother helping a daughter. It was the culmination of something much longer, much more patient, much more rooted in the deep understanding of how the world worked that only the oldest being in existence could possess. Gaia had been in this situation before. She had been the mother whose children were imprisoned. She had been the one who had to wait while those she loved suffered in the dark. She had been the one who had to plan rather than fight, who had to find the indirect path rather than the direct confrontation. She had done all of this with Uranus. She had made the sickle and asked her question and found her instrument in Kronos. And then Kronos had repeated the pattern. He had used his power to imprison the beings he feared. He had made the same mistake Uranus had made, with slightly different mechanics, but with the same essential structure. And Gaia had noted this, quietly, without comment, and had continued to wait. What Gaia understood, what her geological patience and her cosmic perspective gave her that Kronos and Uranus both lacked, was this. The pattern of suppression and liberation was not random. It was not simply a recurring coincidence. It was a structure, a deep structure built into the nature of power and succession and the relationship between generations. Every ruler who tried to prevent the next generation from arising simply accelerated the conditions that would produce a more powerful next generation. Every act of suppression built the pressure that would eventually produce the explosion. Every imprisoned child became a god with a specific and personal reason to overthrow the one who had imprisoned them. Gaia understood this because she was the earth and she had seen it happen in every domain of existence. The seed buried in the ground does not stay buried. The pressure building in the tectonic plates does not remain contained forever. The river dammed does not simply stop. It builds until the dam breaks. Suppression did not prevent the future. It guaranteed it. What Gaia was helping Rhea do was not simply save one child. She was setting in motion the final cycle of the pattern. The cycle in which the suppressed generation would not simply overthrow the suppressor and repeat the pattern, but would find, eventually, a different way. A way that broke the cycle rather than perpetuating it. She did not know exactly how that would happen. She did not know the specific form Zeus's rule would take or the specific decisions he would make. But she understood the direction. And the first step in that direction was protecting the sixth child long enough for him to grow into what he needed to become. The plan was simple. The plan was a stone. The oldest being in existence was going to use the most ordinary thing in the world to deceive the ruler of everything. A stone. The mythology has been precise about this detail for nearly 3,000 years. Not a divine object. Not something with magical properties. Not a creation of the Cyclopes or a gift from another god. A stone. Gray flint. The kind of thing you pick up from any hillside and look at for a moment and set down because it is not particularly interesting. This is the instrument that would change the world. There is something in this that is deeply characteristic of how Greek mythology understood the relationship between power and its undoing. The most powerful being alive, the ruler of the world, the god who had overthrown his father with an adamantine sickle made from the earth itself, was going to be tricked by a rock wrapped in cloth. Not because he was stupid, not because he lacked the intelligence to see what was happening, but because his fear had done to him what fear does to all beings who let it govern their actions. It had narrowed his attention to the specific threat he was afraid of, to the point where he could no longer see clearly anything else. He was watching for a child. He expected a child. He had swallowed 5 children, and each time what he had been given was a child. The pattern was established. The assumption was in place. And the assumption was the vulnerability. Gaia understood this. Rhea would exploit it. She wanted to find a stone. She found it on a hillside. Gray and ordinary, the right size and the right weight. She picked it up. She held it in her hands and felt its ordinariness. The complete absence of anything remarkable about it. A piece of the earth, undifferentiated from the billion other pieces of earth that existed across the world's surface. She wrapped it in cloth. She did this carefully, with the same hands that had wrapped Hestia and Demeter and Hera and Hades and Poseidon, with the practiced precision of a mother who had done this 5 times before. She made it look like a child. She held it against her body as you hold a newborn against your body. She felt the weight of it, so different from the weight of an actual child, and she committed to what she was about to do. And then she went back to Kronos. She presented herself to her husband, the ruler of the world, the most powerful being alive, the being who had swallowed 5 of her children and would swallow this one too if she gave it to him. She held out the stone. Kronos reached for it. He did not look closely. He had never looked closely. Why would he? He was the ruler of the world. No one would dare deceive him. The assumption was so deeply embedded in him that it never occurred to him to question it. He had been given children before, and this was a child, and he reached for it and swallowed it. He swallowed a stone and felt nothing unusual. And somewhere on the island of Crete, in a deep cave on a mountainside, surrounded by the noise of dancing warriors who drowned out every sound from inside, a baby was crying for the first time. His name was Zeus, and the world had just changed in a way that Kronos did not yet know about. And Gaia, the oldest being in existence, had just watched the most important deception in the history of the divine world succeed. She said nothing. She waited. The next part would take time. But the earth was patient. The earth was always patient. Crete. The island rises from the southern sea like the spine of something enormous that has been sleeping beneath the water since before memory. Long and mountainous, running east to west, its peaks rising sharply from the coastline into a sky that is almost always clear. The largest island in Greece, the southernmost, the one that sits closest to the African coast, that catches the hot wind from the desert in summer and the cold wind from the north in winter, that occupies the position in the Mediterranean that makes it both a crossroads and a place apart. It is old, older than the Greek civilization that placed their greatest story on it. The Minoan civilization that preceded the Greeks on Crete built its great palace complexes, its elaborate drainage systems, its vivid and joyful art, its still undeciphered script, more than 1,000 years before the classical Greeks built their temples. The ruins of Knossos, the great Minoan palace complex, still exist on the island. You can walk through them. You can feel the antiquity of the place, the layers of occupation and abandonment and reoccupation, the sense of a location that has been significant to human beings for so long that the significance has sunk into the stone itself. When the Greeks said that Zeus was born on Crete, they were placing their greatest god's birth in the oldest place they knew, in the island that carried the memory of civilizations that had risen and fallen before their own, in the landscape that felt, more than any other Greek landscape, like it contained something prior and something deep. Rhea came to Crete carrying the child that Kronos must not know about. She traveled in the way that divine beings travel, not subject to the limitations of mortal movement, not requiring ships or roads. She came to the island and she moved into its mountains, into the interior that was less accessible and less observed than the coasts, into the high country where the limestone peaks rose above the treeline and the caves went deep into the rock. She was looking for a specific place, not just any cave, the right cave, the cave that Gaia had indicated, the cave that was deep enough and hidden enough and connected enough to the Earth's own substance to keep a secret of this magnitude. The cave on Mount Ida. Mount Ida was the highest peak in Crete, rising to nearly 2,500 meters above the sea. From its summit, on a clear day, the visibility was extraordinary. You could see other islands. You could see the sea in multiple directions. You could see the whole of western Crete spread below, its mountains and its valleys and its coastlines. It was the roof of the island, the highest point, the place where Earth came closest to sky on the oldest inhabited island in the Greek world. And in its limestone flanks, carved by underground water over millions of years, there were caves. Deep, dark, ancient caves that had been known to the Minoans before they were known to the Greeks. The Idaean Cave, as it came to be called, was one of the most sacred places in the ancient world. Archaeological excavations have found votive offerings in it spanning nearly 2,000 years of continuous religious use. Bronze shields, bronze drums, ivory figurines, gold jewelry, objects left by people who came to this place across the full span of classical Greek civilization, all of them honoring the memory of what was said to have happened there, the birth of Zeus. Rhea found the cave. She entered it. She went deep into the rock, past the entrance where light still reached, into the inner chambers where the darkness was complete and the temperature dropped and the sound of the outside world faded into a silence that was absolute. She went to the place where the earth held its deepest secrets, and there, in the dark, she gave birth to Zeus. The birth of Zeus was not attended by ceremony, not by the divine community, not by the titans or the nymphs or any of the great beings of the age. It was attended by Rhea, alone, in a cave in the dark, doing what she had done 5 times before with 5 different outcomes. But this time the outcome would be different. She held him. She felt the weight of him, the warmth, the specific aliveness of a newborn who has just arrived in the world for the first time. She looked at him, and what she saw there, in the first moments of his life, in the darkness of the cave on Mount Ida, was something she had felt in none of the others. The mythology does not describe what she saw. It does not give us the specific quality that Rhea recognized in the 6th child that distinguished him from the 5 who had come before. Perhaps it was simply that she knew this one would be free. Perhaps the knowledge of the plan, the knowledge that she was going to do something different this time, colored everything she perceived. Perhaps it was something genuinely distinctive in the child himself, some quality of presence that announced what he would become. Whatever she saw, she looked at him for as long as she could allow herself to look. She held him for as long as she could allow herself to hold him. And then she did what the plan required. She gave him to the nymphs. Gaia's nymphs on Crete were ancient. They had been on the island since before any human civilization had set foot there, since before the Minoans, since before any name had been given to the place. They were the divine spirits of its springs and its trees and its deep limestone formations. They knew every cave in the Cretan mountains. They had watched over every significant thing that had happened on the island since the island had been an island. They took Zeus. They took him with the practiced care of beings who understood exactly what had been entrusted to them. This was not an ordinary charge. This was the 6th child of Kronos and Rhea, the child who had been saved from swallowing by the oldest intelligence in existence, the child who was going to change everything. They understood this. They took him accordingly. The most important of them was Amalthea. Amalthea was a divine goat, or, in some versions of the story, a nymph who possessed a divine goat. The distinction matters less than what she provided. She fed Zeus. The milk of Amalthea was richer and more nourishing than any other milk in existence, because Amalthea was divine, and what divine beings provide is always more than the ordinary version of the same thing. The milk sustained Zeus through his hidden infancy and childhood on Crete. It was the food of a god in hiding, provided by a being whose devotion to the task was absolute. The connection between Zeus and Amalthea was one of the most tender relationships in the mythology. Among all the gods and all the beings and all the figures that populated the divine world, Amalthea was the one who fed the king of gods in his infancy, who sustained him when he was most vulnerable, who made his survival possible in the most literal sense. Without Amalthea, there was no food. Without food, the hidden god died. The whole plan, the stone and the cave and the Cretes and everything else, depended at its most fundamental level on this divine goat and her milk. Zeus never forgot this. The story of the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, has its origin in Zeus's gratitude to Amalthea. One day, when Zeus was still young and still on Crete and still learning the extent of his own power without yet knowing how to calibrate it, he was playing near Amalthea. He was a god, even in infancy, and a god's play has a different quality from mortal play. More energy, more force, more of the specific carelessness that comes from being a being who does not yet know that things can break. He broke one of Amalthea's horns. The moment he understood what he had done, he felt something. Something that the mythology treats as the earliest expression of the quality that would most distinguish Zeus from his predecessors. The capacity for guilt. The recognition that his actions had consequences for other beings. The impulse not simply to move on, but to repair. He poured his divine power into the broken horn. He blessed it with the first real expression of his divinity, and he gave it back to Amalthea, transformed. The horn of plenty, the cornucopia, the vessel that would forever overflow with whatever its holder needed. Food, flowers, abundance without end. The first gift Zeus ever gave to the world was born from the first mistake he ever made. This is not accidental in the mythology. It is a statement about the kind of god Zeus was and would be. His greatness was not separate from his errors. It emerged from them. His capacity for repair was as important as his capacity for power. The cornucopia exists because Zeus broke something he loved and cared enough to make it better. But before any of this could happen, before Zeus could grow up and make mistakes and learn from them and eventually change the world, the immediate problem had to be solved. The immediate problem was sound. A baby cries. This is not something that can be prevented or suppressed. It is what newborns do. It is how they communicate their needs. It is as involuntary as breathing. And a crying baby, in the silence of the Cretan mountains, could carry on the wind to ears that should not hear it. Gaia had anticipated this. She had arranged for the Cretes to be present. The Cretes were young divine warriors. Exactly who they were and where they came from is one of the more uncertain genealogies in the mythology. Some sources say they were sons of Gaia herself. Others connect them to the nymphs of Crete. Others make them attendants of Rhea. What all the sources agree on is what they did. They danced. They danced around the cave entrance with a specific and purposeful intensity. They wore armor. They carried shields and spears. And as they danced, they clashed their weapons together. Spear against shield, bronze against bronze. The rhythmic crashing of metal on metal, repeated over and over, filling the air around the cave with noise. The noise they made was the noise of war, of ritual, of the kind of sound that human cultures have produced in their sacred ceremonies since before writing existed. The drum and the cymbal and the clashing of metal. The sound that is loud enough to fill a space completely, that leaves no room for silence, that overwhelms every other sound in its vicinity. The crying of a baby was drowned out by the clash of bronze. Kronos, somewhere in the world above, heard thunder. The normal sounds of an active sky. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested a hidden cave in Crete and a god being born in secret and a plan unfolding that would eventually cost him everything. He swallowed his stone. He felt nothing unusual. Zeus grew up on Crete. He grew up not in a palace, but in a cave. Not surrounded by the trappings of divine authority, but by rock and darkness, and the sound of running water, and the particular smell of deep limestone, that ancient mineral smell that is like nothing else in the world, that is the smell of the earth's interior. He grew up with nymphs rather than servants, with the natural world rather than the constructed world of divine courts. He learned the island before he learned anything else. The paths through the mountains, the behavior of the animals, the way weather moved across the landscape from the sea, the quality of light at different hours, the sound of wind in different kinds of terrain. He grew up knowing that the world was trying to destroy him. This knowledge, the specific awareness of being the thing that someone powerful wanted to eliminate, was built into his earliest experience. He could not have survived without it. He had to be careful. He had to stay hidden. He had to trust the beings around him completely because his survival depended entirely on their discretion. This shaped him in ways that would be visible throughout the mythology. The patience that Kronos never had. The capacity for strategy that Uranus never had. The willingness to use indirection and disguise, and the long approach rather than the direct confrontation. The understanding that power, to be sustainable, needed to be something other than the simple ability to overwhelm whatever stood in its way. He was not raised as a prince. He was raised as a secret. And secrets, when they finally come into the light, have a particular kind of force. The force of everything that has been held back for a long time, finally released. Zeus was growing, and everything that the world was about to become was waiting inside that cave on Mount Ida, fed by the milk of Amalthea, guarded by the noise of the Cretes, kept by the ancient nymphs of Crete, hidden from the sky, and from the father who had swallowed his siblings, and who would swallow him too if he ever found out that the stone had been a stone. He was not ready yet. Not for years. Not for whatever length of divine time it would take for the hidden child to become the god who could change things. But he was alive, and being alive was enough to start with. Rhea went to find a stone. She had left Zeus with the nymphs. She had heard the Cretes begin their dancing and their clashing of bronze, and she had felt the noise of it cover the sound of the cave and the sound of the infant god inside it. She had done what the plan required up to this point. The child was hidden. The child was safe. The child was alive. Now came the part that was entirely hers to perform, the part that no one else could do for her. She had to return to Kronos. She had to face her husband with the knowledge of what she had just done. She had to present herself as she had presented herself after each of the previous 5 births, as a mother offering a child, and this time offer something that was not a child. She went to find a stone. What kind of stone? This is one of the details the mythology does not dwell on, because the mythology understands that the stone's ordinariness was precisely the point. It was not a special stone. It had no divine properties. It had not been shaped by the Cyclopes or blessed by Gaia or charged with any particular energy. It was simply a stone, gray flint, the kind of stone that existed everywhere in the Greek world, the kind you could find on any hillside within 10 minutes of looking. She found one. She picked it up. She held it in her hands. She felt its weight, so different from the weight of a newborn child, so cold where a child was warm, so inert where a child was alive, so smooth and hard where a child was soft and yielding. Everything about it was wrong for the purpose it was about to serve, and everything about it was perfect for that same purpose, because Kronos was not going to examine it carefully. Because the assumption that she would not deceive him was so deeply embedded in him that careful examination had never been necessary. Because the arrogance of power had its own specific form of blindness, and she was about to use that blindness with precision. She wrapped it in cloth. The same cloth she would have wrapped a child in. The same careful swaddling that she had performed 5 times before. She folded the fabric around the stone with her practiced hands, with the muscle memory of a mother who had done this and done this and done this until the motions were automatic. She made it look like a newborn. She held it against her body as you hold a newborn against your body. She felt the absence at the center of it, the cold, inert absence of the thing that was supposed to be there and was not. And she went back to Kronos. What was it like to walk back to Kronos with a stone wrapped in cloth? The mythology does not give us Rhea's interior state in this moment. It gives us the action. She went to him. She offered him what she carried. He took it and swallowed it. That is the account, compressed into a few sentences the way the ancient sources often compress the most significant moments, as if the compression itself were a kind of respect for the magnitude of what happened. But the interior state was real, whether the ancient texts recorded it or not. Rhea had been through 5 swallowings. She had felt 5 children taken from her. She had developed, through those 5 experiences, the precise understanding of exactly what Kronos' face looked like when she returned from a birth. The specific quality of his attention when he reached out for what she was carrying. The particular absence of hesitation or doubt or careful examination that characterized his taking of each child. She had watched him 5 times. She knew exactly how this went. She walked back to Kronos carrying a stone. She presented herself. She held out what she was carrying. She met his eyes if he looked at her, and she gave him nothing in her expression that would cause him to look more carefully at what she held. She was Rhea. She was a titan. She was the goddess of the flow of time. She had been through 5 of these, and she had held every one of them without breaking, and she held this one too. Kronos reached out. He took what she offered. He swallowed it. The stone settled in the darkness inside Kronos alongside the 5 gods who were already there. We cannot know if the gods knew the stone had arrived, whether they could perceive it alongside them in the dark, whether they could sense its inanimate quality where they themselves were alive and aware. The mythology does not tell us what the interior of Kronos' experience was like during all the years the swallowed gods resided in him. But the stone was there, cold and gray and ordinary and completely out of place in the body of the ruler of the world. A piece of Gaia's surface, the most basic and most unremarkable material in existence, lodged inside the most powerful being alive. There is something almost comic about this, in the dark, ironic way that the mythology sometimes achieves its deepest effects. The ruler of the world, the being who had overthrown Uranus and swallowed 5 gods, and built the Golden Age and governed the Titans and maintained his reign across an age, had just swallowed a rock. Not a divine weapon, not a powerful object, a rock, picked up from a hillside, wrapped in cloth, given to him by the wife he had wronged beyond any measure and who he had trusted completely because the idea of her deceiving him had never occurred to him. The stone sat in Kronos, and he felt nothing unusual. That feeling nothing unusual was the triumph of the plan. The confirmation that the blindness had been complete, the assumption of safety had been total, the arrogance had served its purpose. He had swallowed the stone and felt it as he felt everything else, and found it indistinguishable from the pattern. The deception had worked. It is worth understanding why this deception worked, not simply as a matter of narrative satisfaction, though there is enormous narrative satisfaction in the clever outsmarting of the powerful, but as an analysis of the specific vulnerability that Rhea and Gaia had identified and targeted. Kronos was afraid. He had been afraid since the prophecy fell from Uranus's lips. He had been afraid with the specific, consuming, relentless fear of someone who cannot accept an outcome that is coming regardless of what they do. That fear had produced the swallowings. That fear had governed his behavior for the entire duration of his children's births. But fear, when it is sustained over a long period, produces something else alongside itself. Familiarity with its own rituals. The routine of managing fear becomes so established that the management itself becomes automatic. Kronos had swallowed 5 children. 5 times the sequence had been the same. Birth, presentation, swallowing. The pattern was established. The pattern was safe. He had done this 5 times, and the prophecy had not come true, and the feared overthrow had not arrived. The 6th time, the pattern appeared the same. Rhea returned from a birth. She offered what she carried. He took it. He swallowed it. Nothing felt different. Nothing prompted him to deviate from the established routine. The routine had worked 5 times. It would work again. This is the specific failure of habitual vigilance. The fear that begins as a heightened awareness of danger relaxes, over time, into a set of protective behaviors that are followed automatically without the original awareness that gave them their purpose. Kronos was no longer actually attending to the question of whether each child presented to him was actually a child. He was performing the swallowing, going through the ritual. The ritual had worked, and so the ritual was followed, and the question it was designed to answer was no longer being asked. Rhea knew this. Gaia knew this. They had designed the deception not to fool a careful intelligence, but to fit through the gap that established routine had created in an intelligence that had stopped being careful. The stone that Kronos swallowed would not stay inside him forever. When the time came, when Zeus was grown and ready, and when the great liberation happened, the stone would be among the first things to emerge, and it would fall to earth at Delphi, the place that would become the most sacred oracle site in the ancient world, the place where the god Apollo would establish his shrine and speak through his priestess the words of divine prophecy that would guide kings and generals and ordinary people throughout the classical age. The place where the question what will happen had its divine address, where the future could be consulted if you were willing to make the journey and offer the appropriate gifts and accept an answer that was rarely straightforward. At the center of that site would be kept, for centuries, a stone, a gray stone, wrapped in wool bindings that mimicked the cloth that had originally wrapped it, called the omphalos, the navel of the world, the center point of everything, the stone that Kronos had swallowed thinking it was a child. The Greeks kept this stone and venerated it because they understood what it represented, not simply a cleverly used prop in the story of Zeus's survival, the central object in the deception that changed the world, the most ordinary thing in existence, elevated to sacred significance by the use to which it had been put, the instrument of the most consequential trick in the history of the divine world, preserved at the place most associated with truth and prophecy. There is something deeply, precisely Greek about this. The navel of the world is a stone, an ordinary stone, the center of the divine order, the place where the future could be known, was anchored by the memory of the moment that the most powerful being in existence was fooled by something he picked up from the ground. Power is fooled by the ordinary things it overlooks. This is what the omphalos at Delphi remembered. Rhea had given Kronos the stone. She had watched him swallow it. She had felt the specific quality of that moment, so different from the 5 that had preceded it, even though the action was identical. Different because she knew what was inside the cloth this time. Different because the deception was complete. Different because she had done it. She had done it. She was still Rhea. She was still the goddess of the flow of time, the force of generation, the great mother titan. But she was something more now too. Something that the 5 swallowings had been making her, and that this 6th act had completed. She was someone who had found a way through, who had looked at an impossible situation and found the specific crack in it and moved through it, who had taken the intelligence and the guidance of the oldest being in existence and used them with precision. She had been the wife who could not stop her husband from swallowing her children. She had been the mother who held her grief in silence for an age. She had been the being who endured what she could not address. Now she had addressed it. Not fully. Not yet. The plan was only at its beginning. Zeus was in a cave on Crete. The 5 swallowed gods were still in the dark inside Kronos. The age of the Titans was still underway. The world had not yet changed in any visible way. But something invisible had changed. Something that would take time to manifest, but that was as certain now as the Moirais threads. The 6th child was alive. The 6th child was free. The 6th child was being fed the milk of Amalthea in a cave on the oldest island in the Greek world. and Kronos had swallowed a stone and felt nothing unusual. And the wheel was turning. Slowly, inevitably, with the patient certainty of the earth itself, it was turning. And what it was turning toward was everything. Zeus grew. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the sixth child of Kronos and Rhea, and one of the things that distinguished him most fundamentally from every divine being who had come before him. He grew. He had a childhood. He had a period of development, of learning, of becoming what he was going to be through the accumulation of experience rather than arriving fully formed in the complete expression of his divine nature. The Titans had not grown up. They had emerged from Gaia and outrun as already what they were, already vast and powerful and fully themselves, without the intervening period of dependence and learning that growing up requires. The swallowed Olympians had not grown up in any meaningful sense either. They had existed in the dark inside Kronos, alive and aware, but not developing, not changing, not accumulating experience. They were held in a kind of divine stasis until the moment of their release. Zeus grew up on Crete. He was, in this sense, the first god to have a childhood, the first divine being to know what it was to be small and dependent before being powerful and free, the first to learn things rather than simply know them, the first to make mistakes and experience their consequences, the first to develop his character through the particular education that only genuine experience provides. This mattered. It would matter for the entirety of the mythology that followed. The cave on Mount Ida was his first world. He learned the cave before he learned anything else. The specific darkness of it, not the absolute darkness of Tartarus, but the graduated darkness of a cave that had some light at its entrance and deepening darkness as it went back into the mountain. The smell of it, that particular mineral smell of ancient limestone, cold and clean and utterly unlike anything above ground. The sound of it, the way water dripped somewhere in the deeper chambers and the sound carried through the stone, the way the silence was different from the silence outside, more complete, more present. He learned the Cretan mountains from the cave outward. As he grew, as his range expanded, as the nymphs allowed him to move further from the protected center of his hiding, he learned the landscape of the island in the way that only a being who grows up in a place truly learns it. Not as a map, not as a set of facts about geography, but as a physical and sensory reality. The specific quality of the stone underfoot on the high mountain paths. The way the wind behaved differently in different valleys. The smell of thyme and oregano on the hillsides in summer. The behavior of the goats and the birds and the other animals of the island. He learned from the ground up, not from the sky down, not from the perspective of power and overview that the sky offered, not the way his father Kronos would have approached knowledge. From the ground, from direct contact with the earth itself. He was the sky god in training, but he was trained by the earth first, by the oldest island in the Greek world, by the stone and the wind and the particular quality of Cretan light. This education had consequences for the being he would become. The sky god who had learned the earth first would be a different kind of sky god than one who had simply arrived in the sky with the authority of divine inheritance. He would be a god who knew what it was to be below, to be small, to be dependent on the earth that held everything up. This knowledge would not make him humble in any simple sense, but it would make him, in certain crucial moments, more connected to the world he governed than any of his predecessors had managed to be. The Cretes were always there. They had been there when he was born, clashing their bronze shields and spears around the cave entrance to drown out his crying. They continued to be there throughout his childhood, a constant presence, a guard and a community and a connection to the world of divine beings that the nymphs alone could not provide. Who the Cretes were is one of the more complicated genealogical questions in the mythology. Different sources give them different origins. Some said they were sons of Gaia herself, divine beings of the earth whose purpose was specifically to serve as the protectors of the hidden god. Others connected them to the Curetes, semi-divine beings associated with the island of Crete who appeared in various Minoan religious contexts, suggesting that the mythology had absorbed and transformed an existing religious tradition from the pre-Greek Cretan culture. What all the sources agreed on was their function. They danced. They clashed their weapons. They made noise. And their noise was not random or purposeless. It was the specific noise that covered the specific sounds that could reveal Zeus's location to anyone who should not know about it. But the Cretes were more than a sound dampening system. They were Zeus's first exposure to the divine warrior tradition, to the combination of dance and combat that characterized the sacred ritual life of many ancient cultures. The line between the dance and the battle was not clear in the ancient world the way it is today. Sacred dances involved weapons. Combat had its ritual dimensions. The movements of war and the movements of ceremony overlapped in ways that the modern separation of art and violence does not allow for. Zeus watched the Cretes. He absorbed their movements. He understood, without being taught explicitly, the relationship between controlled movement and force. The way that discipline and practice and the formal repetition of learned patterns prepared a being for the moments when improvisation and immediate response were required. The Cretes were his first military education, given not as instruction but as example, not as doctrine but as embodied practice observed and internalized over years. They were also his first community beyond the nymphs. The nymphs were nurturing, maternal, connected to the natural world in the specific way of beings who were part of it. The Cretes were different. They were active and martial and connected to the world of divine action in a way that would eventually be more relevant to what Zeus needed to become. He grew up with both influences, the nurturing and the martial, the earth and the warrior. This combination would be visible in the god he became. The nymphs of Crete were his most intimate companions in those hidden years. There were several of them named in the various sources. Adrastea and Ide are the most commonly mentioned, daughters of the king Melicius, who fed Zeus honey when milk was unavailable and who tended to every other aspect of his care. There were others whose names varied across the different ancient accounts. The specific numbers and identities mattered less than the quality of their care. They were, effectively, his mothers, not Rhea, who had given him up to protect him and who could not be with him without risking his discovery. Not any of the great divine beings of the age. These nymphs, ancient and connected to the island, wise in the ways of the natural world, patient with the specific patience of beings who were part of the earth and moved on the earth's timescale. They taught him what they knew. They knew the island. They knew its plants and its animals and its weathers and its seasons. They knew the specific properties of every herb that grew on the Cretan mountainsides and which of them could heal and which could harm and how to use the distinction. They knew the movements of the stars from the particular latitude of Crete and what those movements meant for the timing of things. They knew the underground water systems of the limestone mountains, where the streams went when they disappeared into the rock and where they emerged again. This was not the education of a future ruler. It was the education of a being who was learning to know the world directly, through the senses and through experience, rather than through authority and through power. Zeus, the hidden child, was educated by beings whose knowledge was local and specific and thoroughly practical. Not the broad governance of the Titans, not the management of vast forces and cosmic principles, the particular and the intimate, the taste of wild time, the sound of the wind before rain, the specific quality of water from a specific spring. This too would matter. The God who governed everything would govern it with some memory of the particular, some connection to the specific things that made up the general condition. Amalthea fed him every day throughout the years of his hidden childhood. The divine goat whose milk was richer than any other substance in creation, who gave what she had with a consistency and a generosity that matched the dedication of the nymphs who cared for him. The bond between Zeus and Amalthea was one of the most genuine and most uncomplicated relationships in the mythology. Not the complicated relationships of the divine world, with their power differentials and their competing interests and their long histories of grievance and gratitude. Simply a goat and the child she fed. A child who grew from infancy to whatever counted as young adulthood in divine terms, sustained by what she provided day after day, year after year. When he broke her horn, he felt the loss of it as if he had broken something of his own. The mythology describes his response not as the response of a powerful being who had caused accidental damage to something lesser, but as the response of someone who understood that he had hurt a being who had given him everything. The guilt was real. The impulse to repair was real. The cornucopia that emerged from his blessing of the broken horn was not simply a magical transformation. It was the expression of gratitude so deep that it transformed the object of that gratitude into something more than it had been. The horn of Amalthea became the horn of plenty not because Zeus was powerful enough to make that happen, though he was, because he wanted Amalthea to have something better than what she had lost, because his care for her was genuine enough to produce its own form of abundance. The first gift of the future king of gods was given to a goat, not to a great divine being, not to a titan or a hero or any of the significant figures of the mythology, to Amalthea, who had fed him when he needed to be fed, who had been there every day without recognition or ceremony, who had simply done what she did because he needed it. This is what Crete gave Zeus. The understanding that the ordinary things, the unglamorous things, the things that happen every day without drama or visibility, were the things that made everything else possible. You could not overthrow Kronos if you had not eaten. You could not become the king of gods if you had not survived long enough to grow up. The survival had depended on Amalthea. The throne on Olympus, however many years and battles away it still was, had its roots in the daily gift of a divine goat's milk in a cave on a Cretan mountainside. The years on Crete were not simply a period of hiding. They were an education. Not a formal education, not the kind that involves deliberate instruction and systematic transmission of knowledge. An education in the deeper sense. The development of a self through accumulated experience. Zeus learned patience on Crete, not the patience of someone waiting comfortably. The patience of someone who had to wait because there was no alternative. The patience that comes from knowing you are not yet ready, and that being not yet ready is a condition that will pass if you let it, that cannot be hurried without consequence. He learned dependence before he learned power. He experienced what it was to need other beings completely before he experienced what it was to have other beings need him. This sequence mattered. A being who knows power before it knows dependence treats the dependent with a certain quality of incomprehension. A being who has been dependent knows what it costs. Zeus knew what it cost. He learned the earth before he learned the sky. He grew up with the ground beneath him and the mountains around him before he grew into the sky god that his nature destined him to be. He understood the world from below before he understood it from above. This gave him a perspective that neither Uranus nor Kronos had possessed. The sky god, who had once been a hidden child in a cave, knew something about the experience of being small that the sky gods, who had simply been sky gods, never knew. He learned the cost of fear by living in its shadow. Kronos' fear was the reason Zeus existed in this cave rather than in the world. Kronos' fear was the reason 5 of his siblings were in the dark inside their father. Kronos' fear was the reason the Golden Age, for all its surface abundance, was built on a foundation of violence and injustice. Zeus grew up understanding fear not as a theoretical concept, but as a lived reality. The fear of another being had shaped his entire existence. He understood what fear did when it governed a powerful being. He had grown up in the consequence of it. He would make his own mistakes. The mythology would record them in abundance. He would be unfaithful and jealous and sometimes unjust. He would perpetuate patterns that he had every reason to avoid. He would not simply be the solution to the problem that Uranus and Kronos had been. He would be the next iteration of the problem, with different features and different outcomes, but with enough in common with what came before to make the mythology's insistence on the wheels turning feel honest rather than cynical. But he would also break the cycle in certain ways that his predecessors had not. He would eventually find a path through the prophecy that did not involve swallowing children. He would eventually find a way to rule that allowed the next generation to exist. That was still ahead, still in the future, still on the other side of the war that was coming, and the weapons that had not yet been forged, and the liberation of the swallowed gods that had not yet happened. For now, Zeus was a young god on an island, fed by a divine goat, and guarded by dancing warriors and cared for by ancient nymphs, learning the world from the ground up, becoming, slowly and in hiding, the being the world was waiting for. The Golden Age continued above him, beautiful and unsuspecting, the grain growing and the seasons mild, and the Titans moving through their vast domains, and Kronos ruling from his golden throne with the stone in his stomach that he had never looked closely enough to recognize. And in the cave on Mount Ida, in the old limestone darkness of the Cretan mountains, the future was growing up. Slowly, patient as the earth, ready when it was ready, and not before. This is where we leave you for tonight. But the story isn't over. The young god in the cave has grown, quietly, patiently, shaped by earth and stone and the milk of a divine goat. He has watched fear govern a king and learned what it costs. And the moment is almost here. Next time, Zeus feeds Kronos the poison, 5 siblings freed. This is a chronological series. Every episode picks up exactly where the last one left. You don't need to hold anything in your mind right now. Just rest. Your body needs this. Your mind needs this. And we'll be here every 2 days with the next chapter. Tomorrow, and we say this with certainty, the names you heard tonight will feel more familiar. That is not nothing. That is exactly what this time was for. Millions of people lie awake at night convinced they are falling behind, that every hour of sleep is an hour lost. You know something they haven't figured out yet. This time was not wasted. It never was. If tonight felt like something, if these stories found you at the right moment, subscribe and join us. Leave a comment. Hit like. We're building this community together, and your support helps us keep going. And if you'd like to know how much sleep your mind and body actually need, not a general answer, yours specifically, visit us at geniussleep.rest. We built a free sleep calculator there, just for you. Enter your age, your lifestyle, your daily rhythm, and it will tell you exactly how much sleep your body needs. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Every episode, every night, wherever you listen. Genius Sleep Academy will be here every time you close your eyes. Sleep well.